Hey, listener, this is Matt from the Aviation podcast. This episode, we talked to Red Jensen about composites. Nobody better I can think of, as he's building his own Reno Racer out of high-grade composites in his garage. He has a wealth of information that he gladly shares to everybody listening. So join us in learning today. Pay attention to the chapter markers. If you can't listen to this all at once, as it's a little bit longer, look for the chapter markers and the bookmarks. We also have a video on YouTube, so if you want to see us talking, go ahead and take a look at that. We don't have a lot of graphics specifically. I will put in a brief slideshow as we talk over a topic on his process of doing a vacuum bag layup that he posted to me after the fact, as he put together an extra Prandtl-M wing, which we talk about in the beginning, which here we go.
Okay. Go ahead. So you were saying that when you were trying to scale down the Mars lander to kind of figure out what you needed to do, not the lander, but the Prandtl-M, right?
Yeah, the Prandtl-M series of research aircraft that were, the M is for Mars. They're intended to be a fixed wing aircraft to fly on Mars. And Mars has an atmosphere. It's not breathable, but it's thick enough to support flight, which the Mars helicopter is so aptly proven. And we're looking to put a fixed wing aircraft on Mars. And Reynolds number is sort of the scale factor that most folks are familiar with when they're dealing with really small or even really large aircraft. And the Martian atmosphere is a very unique sort of problem in that it's very, very thin. So your true air speeds are very, very high. And I'm saying air speeds, but there's no air there, so just take that with a grain of salt. Your true atmospheric speed, if you want to call it that.
Atmospheric density, yeah.
Yeah, and your indicated are very low. So you end up having a very, very high a very, very high true and a very low indicated. That means, although this little 24-inch or so span aircraft is going to be flying at around 400 true, which is fast, right? It's only going to be indicating, around 40.
Right.
So the Reynolds number is so low that we get down into very, very lightweight model aircraft range or very high insect range. So we're talking numbers between 10 and 50,000. It's very, very low. So it was an interesting design trade-off to try to figure out how to make that work. And in the end, we ultimately think we did, but we haven't put the aircraft on Mars, so we don't know. But I just thought that was an interesting aside that people might not readily think about those sorts of things.
Right. Yeah. No, and that's critical because you have to be able to understand how the scaling or atmospheric effects really change your model and how it performs, so you're not going to be surprised when it does go where it's supposed to go.
Yeah, and they what I think most people don't realize is that true and indicated are normally reasonably close, not an order of magnitude like 40 indicated and 400 true. That's way off the charts. So
right.
Very interesting design constraint.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's so cool. That is so cool. And that's not even what we're here to talk about.
It's an airplane. It's fair game.
Yeah, it is. I love it.
Okay, there we go. Oh man, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Aviationrcnoob podcast. My name is Joe,
and I'm Matt, and we're here with Brian Phillips. If you've listened, you've heard him before. He's going to join us in our conversation with our special guest, Red Jensen. Red, welcome.
Hey guys, good to see you again. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here.
You back.
Right. And Brian, thanks for joining us again to help us talk out another topic that we know nothing about and we'd like to know more about. Right.
Glad to be here, and I'm excited to get to know Red a little bit.
Yeah.
This is going to be fun.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. So, so we're here. I'm okay. I'm going to introduce Red. He's going to get a little embarrassed, and he's going to say, "Oh my God, the title is ridiculous." But it's a title that he has earned quite well and quite thoroughly because he is. Let's see, Red Jensen. If you do not know him, you can go back to our episode. I think 24 and 25. We talk about. I don't remember what we talked about. We talk forever because he's great to talk to.
Airplanes.
What's that? Yeah, we talked about
Talk about
airplanes.
airplanes.
We talked about the Prandtl wing. We talked about, geez, I don't know, a bunch of different things. But our special guest is Robert, but he goes by Red Jensen, who is a Class 1, Class 2, and again, if it's changed, because it probably has, SUAS Chief Pilot, Master UAS Technician, and the Model Lab Operations Engineer, probably increase that title a little bit more, at the Dale Reed Subscale Flight Research Lab at NASA's Armstrong Flight Research Center at Edwards Air Force Base in Edwards, California. He is also, and probably more importantly, that's part of why we are talking to him today. He is the designer and builder of the Impulse Aero F1 Reno Racer. He is in process of putting together probably some of the finishing touches, maybe. I don't know, some of the guts of the aircraft. But he's done I mean, if you follow he's got a YouTube channel to kind of highlight what the process is and maybe demystify it a little bit because everybody hears composites and they go, oh, that's crazy. I can't believe it. But he has got plenty of experience. He goes through his entire process of building this I'll call it world-class Reno Racer. And it is really incredible to watch. So I want to say a big thank you for being dedicated enough to put that together. I know some of that helps with maybe documenting the experimental class requirements or something like that, but more importantly for the rest of us who are excited about aviation and want to peek into the world of how you put a racer together, it is really exciting to see you put this together and what it takes. It's really wild. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And the whole reason I do it is born out of one, the lack of that sort of stuff that I'd want to watch on YouTube when I'm being lazy on the couch and flipping through channels, and I'm looking for airplane stuff. And there is a little bit of it, but you really got to know where to look. Mike Patey does a great job of sharing that infectious enthusiasm, and what I'm doing is on a different level. I learned how to do composites because of model airplanes. I've been a lifelong aero modeler, and building my full scale airplane that I'm going to put my behind in. It's not too far of a stretch to say it's just a big model airplane. A lot of the same techniques that I've learned over the years go directly into this, especially efficient structures and not overbuilding something.
Mm-hmm. So what do you mean by that? You mean creating them so they're overweight, or?
Yes.
Okay.
It's very, very easy to not do any engineering with composites, and it works just fine. But when you're building something that is in a competitive environment, you need to have a competitive advantage. So, I'm using primarily carbon fiber, but not because it looks cool when you clear coat it, right? I'm using it because it is the most efficient structure for the job that I'm trying to do. So I'm designing to the minimums as far as material gauge and strength, but with enough safety margin that obviously I'm going to be safe, right?
Yeah.
So that's really what it's all about. And I learned how to, not use too much glue. And I learned how to paint the mold before you lay up a part. Again, all because of model airplanes. So these are all techniques that are, maybe foreign to some people, I suppose. But if you're a model airplane guy and you've been doing model airplanes for any length of time on a very serious level, you'll at least be familiar with, fiberglass and resin and things like that. So, again, my channel, I go into pretty big detail of how and why I do things. I stop short of giving any engineering, real numbers to go with it, because I don't want to be liable. But other than that, I'll tell you anything you want to know.
Right. Yeah, I can't remember. Did you ever? Well, that'll be. I'm not too terribly worried, but I'm wondering because I can't remember. It might have been one of your earlier videos where as you build it, you kind of talk about some of the products, but I know you're not. You're like, I'm not here to shill a product. I'm not here to tell you what's the best. I use this. It works for
Yes.
me. But
Yes.
boy, and this one isn't the cheapest, but it's worth it hands down for this, and this. But you rarely kind of. I don't remember you going through like, hey, I'm building this airplane, right? And I'm using these products, and this is why I selected the ones I selected, and kind of just run through that. Did you do that, or because I'm
You
always kind
know,
of curious why people choose. We talked earlier about the Arnold company's videos, and
yes.
they talk
Yeah.
about the different
Huge
resins you
inspiration.
can choose from. Yeah,
Yes.
oh, they're beautiful to watch. Um,
So
I really feel like they give you a solid handle on what kind of effort it takes to put something new, maybe in
absolutely.
aviation, together. But
Yeah.
but he did talk about a lot of different resin. Like it's not just, oh, you pick epoxy, you just
Right.
do it. You're
So
like, ooh,
a
let's go
couple of
there.
things. A couple of things with that. When I'm doing, or when I was doing model stuff, oh, I still do. I'll never not be a modeler. I've got
Amen.
stuff in process behind me while I should be working on something else, but that's always going to be that way. But with a model airplane, oftentimes I will search out the deal rather than the name brand stuff. If that means I have to put a little more labor into it or be a little more patient with cure time or something like that, that's fine.
Hmm.
Um, with my full scale project, I, especially materials I'm building with, I go for something that I can get engineering data on that has a reputable data sheet that I can do, the proper analysis on to see if it's going to
Yeah.
do the job or not. I see Brian nodding his head because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. So
Yeah.
when your butt's in it, it's different. Um, that being said, I'm probably the most underfunded Formula One airplane being built. Like it's just me, and I'm just doing it over many many years, and I'm creating the tools largely by myself. I have some help too, but this is all self-funded, so I don't have uh, anybody footing the bill for all the stuff. So I tend to rely more on labor than I do on say pre-made tooling or something like that. Now I end up with some pretty nice tools, but it's taken me
Hmm.
years to make those tools, and that's hand sanding, hand fitting, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
I don't know that I have a master list of all the products that I use, but I do try to talk about the products, as I'm using them in any particular video. And of course, I'm
Okay.
always happy to answer any questions anybody has as well. But as
Good.
far as the materials go, happy to tell you exactly what I used and why I used it. But there are very specific reasons for each part that's actually in the airplane, as far as
Okay.
material and resin and core material, all that kind of stuff. It's all a trade-off.
Okay. Good. Well, and we'll get into it. So our normal, as if you remember, our normal format is to kind of quickly talk about what we've been up to in the last couple weeks. So why don't we talk about that? We'll go through community items that we might have coming up, so everybody kind of knows what's on the docket of what we do with the community. And then I've got a quick history on the first all composite airplane. It won't take terribly long, but it's an interesting bird. I figured that would be appropriate to talk about. And then we'll get into the topic at large and really get into it. So Red, I don't know. Let's start with you. If you've what have you been up to in the last couple weeks? I know that you put out a video about your progress on the Impulse.
Been working on Impulse on and off. That's where my heart lies. I keep going back to that, but I'm an aero modeler at heart, and I grew up flying sailplanes, so I fly everything, but sailplanes really hold a very special place for me and my interest. I'm uh, actually proud to announce that I'm a test pilot for a company called Heroic Composites, and they are a high-end model sailplane manufacturer. They make all molded sailplanes. So I've just recently gotten the first two offerings from them. Put those together over the last couple of months. Again, my YouTube channel has some video, and you'll find a
Is that
strange mix of stuff there. It's
is that full
full scale
scale, or
cars. Sorry,
is that full scale or is
model.
it RC?
It's
It's
all
model.
RC. Yeah,
Okay.
it's model.
No. We're in both worlds. We're dipping our toes in both sides of this
Sorry,
fence.
it's the
They're
same
all
for me. They all fly.
aviation. No, I know. But I'm wondering, if you're being a test pilot for a glider, you have some great
I'm not that
gliding
brave.
spots out your way. But I
Yeah, we
was
do.
just kind of curious. You do have a pilot's license. It's quite possible. So I
Yes.
figured I'd ask.
Yeah. So I've been, I've gone back to my roots. I've never left it, but sailplanes occupy
Yeah.
probably 2/3 or more of my hangar.
I got you.
So that's what I've been playing with recently.
I found them to be an unlikely joy. I wasn't expecting
It's
that.
for me, it is the epitome of aero design and efficiency, right? There's no motor, so everything that is on a sailplane has to be there and nothing
Yeah.
more.
Right.
And you don't tolerate, poor design.
Did you? I guess did that inspire a lot of decisions, or that mindset inspire a lot of decisions with Impulse?
Well, you're connecting the dots really well. Yes, absolutely. There's a huge amount of sailplane design theory in Impulse. Yeah, for sure.
I was good at counting and math and finding all those dots. Anyway, good. Excellent. Well, okay. I imagine it takes a little bit of time. So between that and what you've been working on with the Impulse, I imagine that's quite a bit of time right there. Well, good.
Yeah.
Again, we're gonna I know there's a lot of stuff going on with your work specifically too. As you work with NASA and you work with the aviation and innovation industry, right?
Yeah.
Is what I'll call it. There has been a big. I can't have you here and not ask you a question about the new reveal, right? You want to tell us a quick bit about it and kind of how, if you have any role in that, or what your thoughts are on it?
Are you talking about X-59?
I am.
Yeah. Sorry, there's a lot going on, so I always have to be careful.
I know, and you were working on projects that will come out years from now, probably,
Maybe.
or
Yeah,
whatever.
maybe.
So what
Yeah,
you're
so
working on, this is old news for you, probably.
Well, not necessarily, but X-59 is the new quiet supersonic demonstrator aircraft, and what it's intended to do is, well, first of all, it's NASA's, latest and newest X-plane. It's a really honest to goodness X-plane. It's not, a rebadged consumer airplane that's doing some testing or something. There's nothing wrong with that, but this is the X-15 of our generation, I suppose.
Awesome.
Not as fast, but certainly as cool. So this is intended to demonstrate that supersonic travel over land can be achieved without disturbing people. So as of right now, the only place you can go supersonic over land in the United States is our test range at Edwards, 2515 Range Complex, which encompasses quite a large area. But,
Right.
For instance, the Concorde, when it would take off, would have to go offshore before it goes supersonic, and then it'd have to decelerate to subsonic before it come onshore into the U.S. And same going the other way. So I don't have a direct hand in X-59. It's the airframe, but we did do quite a bit of testing early on, calibrating a microphone array and with a flying vehicle, that we generate a tone and a series of sounds to calibrate this microphone array that would sense these sonic booms in intensity and frequency and things like that. So
Properly measure it and know that it's accurate.
yeah, and people probably wouldn't even think that was even done, right? But there's been so much work prior to this research and actually building an airplane that goes into something like this. So got a small part in it, but I'm just as excited as anybody else to see it, and I can't wait to see it fly. And a couple good friends of mine are on the flight crew, so I can't wait to hear all about it.
Well, what I've noticed is there's a number of aircraft companies that are, we'll call it, looking forward to having that technology being a backbone of what they provide, which I think is pretty exciting. Again, it's like a new branch of aviation opening up, which it's still
It
an
is,
old branch, right?
and there is a civilian company called Boom Aerospace, and they're in Mojave, which is 35 minutes away from here. And just 2 weeks ago, I saw their airplane out taxiing around the Mojave airport. So it's very likely that they're going to beat NASA to the punch, having the first civilian supersonic demonstrator, right? It's not the first supersonic civilian aircraft, obviously, but the one that's intended to be quiet.
Nice. That's exciting.
I'm going to ask the noob question here because I'm terrible. I haven't been keeping up with that news. And the X-59 is news to me, and this is really cool. I'm looking at pictures of it, and it's crazy looking.
Talk about big noses.
Right? I mean, honestly, this looks more like a starfighter craft or something. It's weird.
Yeah, it's oddball. Yeah.
But is the idea, and I have no idea, like the physics that go on behind, uh, you know, supersonic flight and such. My all time understanding of sonic booms was just essentially the separation and the crashing back together, and then like that leading cone of compressed air. Like those are two explanations I've had of what causes a sonic boom. Again, either the separation of air coming over the wings and it clapping back together, or I guess more accurately, based on things I've seen from like Smarter Every Day and such, is this actual compression cone that comes up, the Mach cone, if you will. So, is some of the design that goes around trying to get out of that sonic boom or not generate it, is that what this sleek, real long, angular? Is it about trying to pierce the air without making this cone, or?
Sort of. So what a sonic boom is the faster you go, the air can't get out of the way quick enough, and it creates a shock wave. And when that shock wave lets go, you get the boom, right? The booms are mostly agnostic to size and more directly correlated to shape. So, for instance, something like a space shuttle, you always get usually two sonic booms. They're very close together, one from the nose and one from the vertical. Usually, that's not always how it is, but usually. So the sonic booms coming off of a space shuttle would be crack, crack, whereas something like a fighter would be crack, crack. They're much closer together. So the idea with X-59, as I understand it, and I'm not on the project, so I'm completely talking out of my posterior here, most likely, is that it's long to delay that separation, right, between the two. And they're not trying to get rid of the sonic boom. They're trying to turn it into a sonic thump. So lower the frequency, lower the intensity, make it more palatable to the human ear, not necessarily cheat the wind in some way that you're making some efficiency increases. That's not really what it's about. It's all about you and I not being upset when it flies over at 2 a.m. with passengers on board.
So they're kind
That's
of,
really what it's all about.
we'll call it spreading the force load out,
Yeah. Yep.
basically. And by doing so, you're not basically shattering windows as you go overhead. And
That's exactly
obviously
right.
getting people upset, which is that was the biggest thing when the Concorde was being tested and stuff. They had a swath of windows that were gone because they
Yeah,
didn't
and
realize how it was going to affect, right?
the other thing that people don't realize too, and why would they realize it? It's not something that people talk about daily, is that sonic booms are directed. In other words, they come off of the airplane in a very specific direction. And you can shape the way the sound shadow or the acoustic shadow is, which is the area that's covered by the sonic wake, if you will, by the shape and the direction of the vehicle. So very early on when we were trying to gather funding for this, they were doing some demonstration flights with an F-15. A very large airplane. It will easily go twice supersonic.
Right.
And, we're gathered out on the lake bed and they'll fly over at some altitude, 30,000 feet or whatever it is, go supersonic, and you hear it very distinctly. It's a crack. And then the pilot will reset, go up higher, and then come straight down right at us at the same altitude and the same airspeed. And the sound is absolutely ear-shatteringly intense. It's like amazing how much different it is when the two relative booms, the thing creating the boom is in the exact same space and the exact same condition to create both booms, but that the way that it's pointed changes drastically how that sound is perceived on the ground. So a lot of that shape you see is not necessarily, again, to make it more efficient or slip through the air any more cleanly. It's to direct the noise in such a way that it won't be offensive, as offensive.
Right. Except for
If you
those
will.
folks in space who are hearing it.
Yeah, well, there's no air in space, right? So the sound's not going to go very far.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think the midichlorians are for?
That's right. And the other interesting thing is you asked about what we've been working on. And sorry, I'm rambling again, but
That's okay.
there is
Oh,
some
please.
upcoming work where we're using an off-the-shelf multi-rotor, very large multi-rotor, but off-the-shelf nonetheless. And we're carrying not only a high-fidelity camera, but also a LiDAR. And what our job is going to be is to map the airports where this X-59 is going to operate around the country and eventually possibly around the world. Because if you look at that airplane, the nose gear is about 40 feet behind the nose of the airplane.
Right.
So
Mhm.
when you're taxiing, there's this giant schnoz that sticks out
I
the
didn't even
front.
think about that.
Right.
Neither did they. So,
You sure it's
we're
not
gonna
gonna
fly
like
around.
fold back like the Concorde has
No,
the whole dipping
no,
nose or
unnecessary complexity.
I know,
So
right?
we're gonna make sure that it'll clear any obstacles where it's gonna operate. Um, so that'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to doing that, and we are uniquely suited to do that because they were going to hire a helicopter and do that whole thing, and I can
It's a
show up
lot
with
cheaper.
a couple of
Yeah.
suitcases full of stuff, and I can for one or 2 days of their helicopter rental, I can own the system and use it infinitely.
Right. Yeah.
Just
Smarter
make
choices.
sure you've got your RFID or your
Yeah. Well, so at Edwards, I don't need it because I'm in restricted
Yeah.
airspace, but eventually we
Yeah.
will.
But
Nah, it was a joke.
going around to different airports, you're gonna have to do something, right?
Yeah.
Or
Well,
maybe
it'll
not.
be
Just
military airports in the
oh,
beginning.
okay. That makes sense. Well, good. Awesome. Thank you, Red. Brian, why don't you tell us what you've been up to in the last little bit?
Not as much as I would have liked. Been things have been a little busy around my house lately and at work and stuff, but I have and it's a little too cold to do any flying, so a little bit of building here. Working with Windcatcher. We're uh, working on a little profile model
Okay.
that
Right. Is
that
that's your build your way
looks
model
nicely.
or
I'll probably pull it out of there. I probably won't show it in there, but so we've been working on that one a little bit, and then I've put together a couple of flight test planes over the last couple of days
okay.
as well. I got an RV-12 right there
Yep.
that's just needs some servos,
Nice.
and then it'll be ready to see how well it works. But
Excellent.
so not too much in the hobby, other than looking at stuff and trying not to spend too much money to get my wife mad at me.
Isn't that
Right.
always a challenge?
Yeah, it is always
So
a
it's
difficult-
it's a balancing act, right?
Well, I just get mad at myself when it happens to me. Why did I spend that money? Anyway, yeah. Good. Joe, what about you?
I
What? I'm sorry, Brian. Read
I was just gonna say I completely forgot. I did add a new order a new toy to add to the hobby.
What's that?
So I've got my 3D printer is a Prusa Mark III that I've been using for years, and it's an
Okay.
old work. Been a workhorse for me. I bit the bullet and ordered a Prusa XL, the big
Ooh.
five head tool changer. So that's gonna be it's gonna be a couple months before it shows up, but that'll be a fun toy to play with.
You said 5 head tool changer. Is that like 5 different spools going into it, or is it 5
Yeah.
like a laser cutter, a whatever? I don't
No,
know.
it's five different extruders.
Okay. Excellent.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Nice.
Yeah.
Whew.
you can do multi materials and multicolors and all sorts of
Good thing I know you.
shenanigans.
I got ideas. Anyway, no, that's good. Cool. Joe, what about you? I know you've been working on a couple things.
Honestly, um,
Yeah,
the
about
last
a couple weeks ago, you were working on something.
was I?
You were up in the build parties doing some stuff.
I know I had to get the flight sims working
Yep.
on my system again. And
Right. So
then
you were in the flight sims with everybody. You had a sim night
yeah,
a
we
couple weeks ago.
kind of covered that with the community section.
Okay.
But really, since it's only been 2 weeks since our last episode, and I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but a couple
It's
years
not
ago, I
talking
would
about
have
Debbie like
never
that.
mentioned this, but these guys have been with us along on the journey, so I don't mind just
Yeah.
go ahead and letting folks know what's up. But I'm going through basically my subway situation again, where
Ugh.
company is doing
Ooh.
things, and so
Yeah.
time is short, so hobby time is going to be
Low priority.
next to none for the next little bit.
Well, I appreciate you coming on tonight and helping us out.
Well, I definitely couldn't miss Red. Are you kidding me?
Well, that's why I was trying to sell it, but
Well,
it wasn't
Brian,
Need better
too.
friends.
I don't.
Yeah.
How can
Joe's
you?
Joe's here to see me. Come on, who are we kidding?
So,
It's okay. But that's I hate to say it, unfortunately, but that happens in life, and
it does.
and it changes, and it seems like during those times you either go one of two ways. You go, well, I'm taking time for my hobby. I'm gonna do the things I got to do to kind of reassess and get to it. But when I have the free moments, I need to get my mind clear, and this is the best way to do it. Or you say, I can't afford to do that because that makes me want to spend money. I can't afford to do that. So I'm going to hold off on all that stuff while I get everything situated.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing right now, just because, without spending too much time on it, things are very much up in the air right now.
Yeah.
When news
I hate
initially,
that for you.
yeah, I know. When news initially broke, I thought last Wednesday they were just going to go ahead and pick either me or my coworker and walk one of us out the door. And then we had a meeting with the new head, and he's like, I don't know what you guys do because we're merging departments and we're going to wait it out and see. And then it was like, okay, do we have a week? Do we have 2 weeks? Like, when's this? And now it's
Right.
looking like I may have upwards of maybe 2 months
Okay.
before an ultimate decision. So, like, the timelines keep changing. But
Okay.
also during some of this time, I know it sounds like Monday I'm going to be flying out to Florida for 2 weeks as we've
Okay.
got handbacks and equipment to pull. And then I'll be back for 2. And then I'll have to go out to the Midwest, Wisconsin, Minnesota area
Nice.
in the beginning of March. So if any of you guys are out there in like Wisconsin, Minnesota, I know that's like some big states. But
We're only 8
yes,
hours away. It'll be great.
yeah, I'll be out in the area, and it'll be a weekend where I think I'm gonna be staying in a hotel out there. So if you're in the area, hit me up, and we'll see if we can't like at least meet up and say hey.
We'll send Joe a PM and see if you can get a little bit more details. Meet up with them.
Yeah, but that's where all that's going. But in the meantime, just giving folks heads up. Matt, you and I have had a little bit of discussion. I don't know what my time's going to be like for this kind of stuff, and I know that you take a lot of the work now these days on getting the editing and all that done. But just to make sure that my efforts are focused where they need to be at this time.
Yeah, that's important.
I may need to take a couple episodes off.
Yep.
And I hate to do it, but you've already kind of put some feelers to a couple folks who can fill in my stead.
Yep. I've got a couple of ideas of folks who can join us, topics to talk about. That I think we had them a little bit further down the list of ideas, and I think it'll be we'll work them in a different way. It'll be fun.
I'm busy that day, man.
Okay, so if you're interested, I'm just kidding. Actually, speaking of that, one of the segments though we would like to start doing more of is to get if you're new in the hobby and you want to share your experiences as you've trundled along a little bit into it,
cool.
and want to share the experience so that others who are new in the hobby kind of get a sense as to what they might be in for, and maybe pitfalls that you saw that you could help people avoid or whatever, or just how much fun you've been having. And thank goodness for, hey, I went here and learned this, and it was immeasurable. We'd love to talk to you and have you kind of join us for a little while and just chat about that experience. So if you want, reach out to us. Aviationrcnoob@gmail.com. Yeah, so well, good. Thank you for letting us know, and I appreciate that, Joe.
Yeah, like I said, I don't want to make a big deal about it. I just, our guys have been with us long enough. I don't mind saying so. But on to you. What have you been up to? You've had some things going on.
Well, I mean, I'm plugging along. I'm trying to build 4 planes in February while building RC aircraft carrier, right?
Right.
Kind of almost to the same. So most of my projects are related to it. I ended up creating a 7-inch ring plane to go,
That
and
looks
I
really
found a
good,
way
by
to
the way.
motorize it. Was that?
I said, that looks really good, by the way.
Thanks. I
It does look
appreciate it.
pretty cool.
Yeah. So I took a Eachine E010. It's one of those $15 drones that you can buy in Banggood for almost, for like nothing. It comes with the transmitter. I don't know how the heck they managed to pull that off, other than questionable labor practices, or I don't know what. Maybe they dregs it up from the ocean. I can't imagine how they find for that price where they and they actually have a newer one. I ordered a handful of, and they were, I think, $16, and I think it's bigger motors. They have a altitude hold and a couple other things. I was like, whoa,
Oh,
let
wow.
me see. Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can maybe if that one I can actually program with silverware. It's basically a Betaflight light. It's lighter than Betaflight light.
So
So it can
square
actually
root of Betaflight or the cube
no,
root?
so you can put acro mode on something like this, and you
Okay,
can fly it like a traditional quad, where you lean forward and you can leave it there and let it go, and
that's
has
dangerous.
other features and stuff. Anyway, trying to get this to actually function like a plane. I've got one with a motor missing, and so I don't know if they're mats. I don't know what the heck's going on with that. I can't get that to fly properly. But this waggled around my yard. Of course, I finished it at like 1 in the morning or something the one night. So of course, what do I do? But go out to my front yard where it's pitch black, and
Hmm.
I fire this up and zooming around my yard like twice. I was like, oh my god, flew! This is great.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, that's about right. So I
That
was
checks out.
thinking.
That's Matt.
Yeah, it's me. That's me. So I was actually thinking of I might be able to change it around where these motors are all four facing the same direction. I saw an example. I think Joy Planes did a video of how they turned one of these into like an airplane. And so it's going to do this on one of the ones in the back because that creates a stabilized plane that we can fly on and off the aircraft carrier for peanuts, and basically have a product that anybody can go and just try to land up there, and have a good time with it. And if it crashes, I'm not going to cry because it's not like I put this $100 of components that just went into the dirt or something.
Right.
So, yeah, and plus I can actually have the scale version flying around with a bunch of little RC controlled planes that are trying to land on it again. So, and I think this is, I think it's got enough oomph where I should be able to put FPV camera on it. So we can
Oh,
really do some fun testing with it, I think.
Yeah.
I'm really excited
Okay.
about this part. In the meantime, I also built the other 4 planes. I'm working out motor systems to go on the full size ones, again, 20 inchers in the back. And I've spent, as I continued to find components, I'm like, where is that thing? It was glue. I went through 6 boxes trying to find glue. Ended up, so I've actually cleared out all of the boxes. And the boxes are required of like for the last 3 years. Every time I had a project and I had to clear the desk because I had stuff to do, like play D&D or oh, the folks are coming over, I want to set out a dinner. It's like, oh shoot. And I sweep that all into a box and I put the box on a shelf and I don't remember what any of the components are. So I've been doing that for 3 years. I've got all these boxes everywhere and I finally cleared them out and I put them in labeled containers. And I can't tell you how many things I went, Eureka, this is where it is. Matter of fact, I've got these bearings that have flanged bearings that were for the needle cutter. I found
yeah.
those. That was the big thing I've been looking since the beginning. I'm like, I know they're in there somewhere. I don't want to buy another set. I know they're cheap, but it's the principle of the matter. I know I have them. I know if I buy them,
Then you'll find it.
I'm gonna find them the second I get them. It's like,
Hmm.
ugh. Anyway, like no, I'll figure it out. So anyway, found those. It was really exciting. So it's been pretty productive. It's been a lot of fun to kind of spend quality time with the shop. But again, we're chugging forward. I'm hoping to get a maiden flight with the the actual carrier because I've devised because I had to figure out how to connect the landing surface to the main flying body, and I've made power pods, and the power pods I'm going to glue on probably tomorrow. So I should have things wired up by the end of the week. I'm hoping, and give it a test on Saturday. And then we'll see if we can this thing. I don't know, somehow shoot out of it, or who knows. I'm pointing to the little 7-inch flyer. So, and if you don't know, look up what a geobat looks like, and these things look a lot like that. All right, yeah, I think that's it.
Okay.
So why don't we move on to? I know we have a couple things in our community coming up next weekend. This coming weekend, I will probably, when you're hearing this, I will be building because it's the one of the last weekends for Buildroy, and the 29th, because we have 29 days this February. I will definitely be building. I'll be on the build party, talking to people who've, and if you're building or if you want to just join in and chat aviation, I'm always interested. But it's the last day to build and try to fly aviation. I should probably do it on a Wednesday, so I have a shot on Thursday to fly that
Th-
last couple model that I finished up
th-
on Wednesday night.
Didn't you put an extra week in there for the maiden flights?
Well, it's for putting the videos together and editing and putting those up. So, I don't know. I can't remember what the wording was. If I, but you still like the goal is to try to fly it that last. How there's not a
It's
lot of time. Yeah.
it's just really cold here. I'm just trying to make
No, I
excuses.
know. Like I've had a lot of complaints from people who are in your same situation who are like, dude, it must be nice to live in North Carolina where it's beautiful and wonderful in the middle of the winter. For us up here, it's like 6 feet of snow. And I'm like, hey, just put a skid on the bottom. You'll be fine.
Not to hurt the feelings of people who live in places, Brian, but I need to cut my grass before I go out of town next
Pardon me.
week.
Right?
And I went and cut fresh flowers out of the flower bed for my wife when I got home from work. So
The weeding is all year round. It doesn't stop.
yeah, not
Just saying.
here.
That's
Not
the
here.
one drawback.
We had about
I ju-
3 weeks of brown grass, and that was about it.
I just want to ask Red if he has grass.
Yeah, I do.
Dude,
Not a lot,
good.
but a little bit out front. Yeah, I have probably, I don't know, 40-foot circle or something.
That
Lot-
grass that
A lot
manages to
of
survive
folks
winter.
down that way. A lot of folks down that way don't keep too much grass.
No, I'm about an hour north of LA, so I'm in kind of the high desert. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
very dry here, and grass is not that common.
Get it. Joe, go ahead.
I was just gonna tell Red I used to spend my summers on the other side of the Mojave, out near in the little town of Newberry Springs.
Oh, I know exactly where that's at. Yeah, that's pretty out there.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, so you know the temperament. For sure.
Do. Yeah.
Good.
Matt, what were you going to say?
No, I was gonna see. I was gonna see if we can't. Is there anything else on any community events that
I
should
did
talk about?
I did the sim party.
Yeah. Let's hear about that.
Basically 2 weeks ago. Yeah, I think it was the night before the episode went live last. And had a small little turnout for that. It was nice. Got to
Yeah.
walk some guys through getting their stuff set up right. It was kind of odd having to remember how to launch the transmitter emulator, because once we got into it, I realized you have to launch the emulator, and then from within the emulator, then you launch the Phoenix software. But we got the guys that showed up to be able to join and do the thing. I actually had a buddy down that night, and so I did a bit of flying. I know folks in Discord couldn't hear me very well, but I was able to kind of listen and hear what folks were doing. And
Good.
I know Richard and I think it was Richard and Hank, but it might have been Richard and Sasha.
Okay.
But I think it was Hank. Were doing one of those planes that I forget what it's called, but it has the rotating engines that go upward, and it
the
does
Osprey?
vertical takeoff.
Osprey.
Yeah.
Oh man, that is such a
Terrible.
tricky bird to fly.
Yeah. And seeing them try to take off and do the transition into flight, and then
yeah.
And then my buddy, who's actually not into the hobby, I had him sit down and give. I think I was flying a Spitfire, and give the Spitfire a little bit of time. He actually flew pretty well. I was
next time get him out to the field.
About
yeah, you're like, hey, you just started. You're supposed to be awful at this.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. No, it's great. That's
but
awesome.
that's I think other than the Bilgewater stuff, the only other major things I know, we'll have to plan some future build nights
for
not Bilgewater related, and then it'll sort of be transitioning into that mad dash heading for Flight Fest.
Right? Oh my God! Please don't tell me. I can't even. I'm not ready.
Look, I hadn't even started the Giant Wonder. About the time I was like, yeah, it's time. It's about time I start the Giant Wonder, and then kablooey. So
yeah,
well, you know how that goes.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that's okay. We'll work through it and we'll see what we can do. Right? Or we just show up and have a good time with everybody who's going to be there. So we've already bought our tickets and the campground spot. I can't remember what the numbers are. They're kind of out where we were last time. We'll have a flag. We'll put it up. You'll be able to find us. We probably won't be there, so go to the local build tent. That's probably where we'll be. To be honest, I think we were there last time almost the entire time. So I won't be surprised if we do something similar. Or look for a giant aircraft carrier flying around like at a slow tooling around the sky speed, and that'll be us. So
an old fogey's going to outrun that thing.
I don't know. I have no idea.
That's the point, though, right? You got to be able to catch up to it so you can land on it.
Exactly. I just want to change the differential speed between those in the air and the ground, so that way the differential doesn't have to be so big, so the landing distance doesn't have to be so large.
There you go.
They can stop in a shorter field, because I'm not looking to put 100-foot long length up there. I can't. I don't know how the heck I'm going to fit that in the
Yeah,
trailer. I guess.
I don't
There's
know.
logistics. It'll be fine. We'll be fine. It'll be great. I promise.
I got a trailer for sale in the neighborhood down the road. It's just I know more than you want to. It's
What's
more than you want to spend.
Okay, well, you and I can talk about that offline. But yeah, definitely looking for a trailer so that way we can haul some things. I'm definitely looking at possibly buying an ultralight to be able to tool around the sky locally as a possibility.
Red's
There is
excited.
I want to call it a Golden Eagle. It's a biplane, and I think they attached a really light paramotor motor on the back, and I think it used to be you'd foot launch it. You'd run up and just do what you could, and then you bring it in. There's somebody selling one for $2,500, and it's a little suspicious to me. It's pretty cheap. Usually that comes with a price, and it's time and effort.
So
And
you want to buy one instead of building one?
I would love to do both, but I got to get through some medical maladies. Right now I got a Charlie horse in my, I don't know, my muscles are falling apart. You know what I mean? Like I tell you what, it's
Charlie horse.
this getting old thing is the worst.
Yeah.
I got a
Those
shoulder
Charlie
that's not.
horses are debilitating.
Oh my God! Look, I didn't realize it could be. I thought it was like, it'll pass. Nope. This old man says no, it won't. It's gonna hang on for weeks. So
It's funny.
anyway, we'll see if I can. No, but I definitely would love to build one. I'm a little wary. I don't know. I'm gaining confidence, and it may be fool's confidence. So again, still looking at videos. But I like the idea. Was it?
I was gonna say the first flying machine I ever piloted was an ultralight.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun.
20 hours of pilot experience already, right? Like in the Cessna 172. Like it's not like I don't know nothing. I know some things. I also know roughly how dangerous it can be.
You know enough to be dangerous.
Right. I also know enough to be dangerous. So yeah, I kind of bury those things. And what I'm looking to do is kind of get back and finish the pilot license so that I have it under my belt. I would like the ultralight to be able to go to a local field and fly around for an hour near dusk, a little bit before dusk, and enjoy some sky time. And then when I need to get somewhere, I can go rent a plane and go places, right? But for the
Just
local
remember,
flyer, I would love to have something cheap and just easy to get off the ground.
Just remember, landing's the easiest part.
No, landing where you can walk away.
Well, I didn't specify.
I know you didn't. I saw that.
Landings are mandatory.
Yeah, takeoffs are optional. Landings are mandatory.
Yeah, absolutely. As we all know with our RC planes, half of them crash. So, all right. Enough. Okay, so look out in the Discord. There'll be information in the events stuff at the very top of the channel list. We're also going to post to Facebook one if I can remember to do that. So look out for events that we're going to host. Definitely a build night next month. We'll see if we can't maybe have a sim session, because part of what you did helped me go, oh, I should probably look at that and figure out how to do that. Get the kids maybe a couple weeks of sim time so I could actually get them in the air when it's time to get them up. And I was able to get them both working real flight, and I figured out what the quirk was. There's a weird quirk, but I figured it out, which is nice. So anyway, so good. So let's go to our history segment then. Anybody know what the first the stated first composite airplane is?
I do, but only
production or home built.
I would say production, but even then, I think it's actually officially, I think it's kind of a home built. It looks like some kind of janky hybrid, really. And then they call it a composite, and I'm like, oh, no.
Okay. This isn't the one we were talking about the other day.
No, but we'll get to that in a second. So. That's really what the topic is about. But what do you got? What does Wikipedia tell you? When I looked,
I'm gonna take a guess. One of the very early ones is a very Vigan, which was a Rutan design.
Right? No, that's not.
I don't know what the first one might be.
It was a Bristol in World War I, 1916 or 18, I think. And what they did is they literally like lashed a boat to it, and so technically it was a composite. because the boat
Awesome.
was a composite. And I was like,
Just like
"Ah,
baseball, you can fish out any stat you want, right?
oh
You
my
just gotta
god!" Right?
Yeah.
filter the data
Change
correctly.
change the definition of composite and you can call it anything. The
Well,
first, the Wright brothers plane was made out of wood. Wood's
right?
kind of a
Wood
composite.
and glue
Wood and
resins,
fabric.
right? Like then,
Yeah.
isn't that a composite? I mean, technically,
I mean,
Linen.
right?
wood itself is a composite.
I was thinking the linen and dope, isn't that effectively a composite? I mean,
Yeah.
You can
but
mold
anyway,
it.
yep. I'm just
Yeah.
saying. So composites have been around in the aviation for a long time. It's ultimately what I'm getting at. But the very first all composite airplane was created in 1969. I think a little bit earlier is when they started the development of it. But in 1969, um, there was the Eagle One, which is the Windecker Eagle One. It has a distinction of being the very first all composite plane to receive the FAA certification. Um, the Windeckers, there were two, I believe, dentists to put together this experimental airplane as Dr. Leo Windecker and Dr. Fairfax Windecker. They're both work, and they ended up working after kind of creating this plane. They ended up working with Dow Chemical Company to develop a lightweight fiberglass that they and some reinforced plastic structure for the aviation. And it's flexible. It's like this weird kind of non-woven, almost a series of linear strands with a handful of like woven segments to kind of keep it together. And they called it was it fiballoy or fiballoy or whatever. Um, and then they would inject it with a resin and create these parts, much like we do today. And they're like, hey, the great part is we can kind of mold it to whatever shape we want. And then once the resin sets in between the fibers, it really, I mean, you could pretty much do anything you want with it. Um, and then so and then it ended up resulting in the Windecker X7 prototype. And you see, it kind of looks like almost like we were looking at it the other day. It's like a Cherokee, a Piper, but kind of like a
And I
squat Cherokee, right? I'm sorry, what was that, Red?
was gonna say, typical low wing four place
Yep.
looking airplane.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Very, very, I'll call it traditional personal flyer, right? Like you said, low wing. And it was almost like like they kind of squished it down. It was very, I'll call it slender compared to some of the more well known versions of that kind of plane, right? Um, but it was, yeah, four place low wing monoplane. It received FAA certification only after building in a 20% over designed airframe, which seems a little sketchy to me. And they used to call it the plastic plane because all the pieces felt were made out of
Polymers.
plastic. Yep, polymers, good old polymers. I think was it the Graduate. You know what the future is? Plastics. Sorry, what comes to my mind. Apologize for that. Anyway, so yeah, a lot of people were a little bit nervous about how the composite would perform over its lifespan. 6 of these planes were completed. It was never able to really break into the market in the 1970s, as there was already a number of like well-established production aircraft by that point. But it is a testament to laying the groundwork of what you can do with composite materials. I'll have a link to the Air and Space Museum website that I pulled some of this information from. But yeah, it's a neat
Tur-
little
tur-
plane.
Turns out that composite stuff is pretty versatile.
Yeah,
There
so
is.
that was
Yeah.
that was part of what they talked about is that they could mold it in any shape and form they wanted, and they could lay as many layers as they felt they needed to get what they were looking for. And then it didn't really talk a lot about, did they put it on some sort of foam core or like how they molded it or any about how they put it together. But there's a number of videos. I'll have another link, not just to this thing, but there's a video that I'll share a link to, and it's kind of a more robust version of their kind of promotional video, maybe about what makes their product so great. So let's see.
Does it say what type of fiber orientation, like if it's a random like chop strand,
No,
or if it's a woven fabric base?
yeah. So if you look at the, here's a, if you look in the video, the Texas Archive video, texasarchive.org, and it's anyway, they kind of show this. steel. It's like a series of monodirectional strand, but it's occasionally either woven or it's somehow maybe glued to a horizontal piece to kind of keep them in line. Make sure and they're spaced. It looks like about 6 inches apart. So otherwise they're monostrand. They almost look like an unwoven fabric.
It's
Interesting.
called unidirectional fibers usually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's unidirectional. So I guess you lay them down in the direction you need the strength and keep doing it until you got what you want. Obviously they were trying to develop this with the Dow Industries, and it looks like I'm sure it laid the groundwork for making a lot of what we use today. Because obviously planes are mostly there's a lot of planes that are um, designed with these methods nowadays, right? They use PrePreg and all that kind of stuff where they kind of take it. It seems like the common understanding is that if you're going to use a certain amount of carbon fiber, you might as well use aluminum. It seems like it's almost an even trade-off depending on what you're aiming for. Obviously, if you're looking for, um, we'll call pushing the edge of this is my safety margin. If you want to get up to the bottom of that, you're probably going to be more apt to use carbon fiber or some other composites. But they come with they have different performance characteristics, right? You're not getting metal interference with some of the radio systems. Carbon fiber is known. That's I know something. I apologize. I know that's something that Brian you've mentioned before, and that we noticed with RC is like you can't just bury your if you make an all fiberglass composite airplane, you can't just bury your radio system in it. You have to make sure that the radio system is pushing out past the carbon fiber, and that it's in a spot where it's not going to get interfered with by any other part of the plane while it's flying.
This
Right?
will be a dumb question, but does carbon fiber actually interfere with radio equipment?
It absolutely does. It shields it.
Yeah. And it's electrically conductive.
Yeah.
Right. When you want it to be, and it's not when you don't want it. It's not easy to work with in that.
It's
Fiberglass
caused me
and
a lot of heartache.
Yeah.
Right. What was that, Red?
Fiberglass and Kevlar are mostly RF transparent in the frequencies that we're used to, but carbon is a great insulator.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Makes it tough to have radio controlled craft. Or does it interfere with GPS?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So all the things.
Absolutely.
It's like
that's something I've been having work on at work. It drives me crazy.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So so you can see there's a trade-off, right?
It's a very real integration problem in the aerospace world, because typically if you're building a carbon fiber, let's just say you're building a carbon fiber airplane, well, you're doing that because you got this very sleek shape, or you this very complex shape that you want to achieve, right? That's not easily replicated in metal, and then you got to put antennas on it. Well, you don't want antennas sticking out because you've got this sleek shape. The whole idea of having the sleek shape is not to have all these protuberances. But then you've got to go hang antennas on the outside so that you can talk to it in whatever form, GPS, comm, whatever it might be. And Brian's nodding his head. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's like you build this beautiful thing and then you put a Band-Aid on it.
I mean, are you? Is it? I know structurally, discontinuous systems are trouble, right? So, but is it reasonable to say, hey, this pocket here is going to house what GPS, let's say, and that GPS needs to basically be transparent facing upward. Let me make a panel that's Kevlar, right, and integrate that with a carbon fiber. The carbon fiber stops at a window, and then you use the other fabric basically to continue the stuff. And maybe it's not as strong in that zone, but you design for it, and then that way you've got transparent material around it where you need, but you maintain we'll call it the sleek.
You ever hear of a radome?
Mm-hmm.
The nose that house like weather radar in an aircraft have they call it RF transparent radome, which is it lets the RF in and out through these fibers. Now, one misconception is that fiberglass is weaker than carbon fiber. That's not necessarily true. It depends on how much fiberglass and how much carbon fiber, right? So you can have equivalent strengths with different materials. Just a matter of the weight and the cost trade-off. So
Right.
again, Brian's
Like
nodding his head.
aluminum and yeah, well, aluminum and steel. I mean, they're vast differences, right? But as far
Yes.
as weight versus, but when you
Yeah.
get down to it, like if you can have a lot of aluminum that will match to a certain point the strength of steel. You just
That's right.
there's other properties that you have to worry about. You're going to get a different, but to get the same amount, you're going to have to. Anyway,
Yeah, in
but
engineering,
I
you end
get
up
it.
with you end up in this corner called minimum gauge, which means that the material that you've chosen may be overkill for the thing that you're trying to build. So, one layer of carbon fiber may be overkill for the strength that you actually need. And this is where, we as modelers fall into this trap of I'm gonna carbon fiber my airframe. Well, it's complete overkill because it's more strength than is necessary. It ends up being overweight when you could accomplish the same thing with white glue and brown paper or fiberglass resin and some lightweight fiberglass cloth or something like that.
Right.
The other trap with composites that people fall into is they treat it like black aluminum. In other words, they try to fasten it together with mechanical fastener. Brian's laughing again. He knows exactly what I'm talking about. They build these beautiful composite sandwich structures and then they try to bolt them together, which is completely contrarian to the way a composite structure should be designed. They're typically a monocoque, which means it's an eggshell. The strength comes from the
Right.
shape of the thing, right? You take two panels and you run holes through it and then drill through it, you completely defeated the purpose. And that's where the efficiency of the structure dominates. And if you don't engineer it properly, you're just spinning your wheels. You're not going anywhere.
Right. Yeah, very interesting. Well, let me finish up the specs on the plane, and then we can talk
Okay,
about
sorry,
composites
sidetrack.
proper. No, that's
No,
okay.
I mean, we're jumping ahead. We're
This is-
jumping ahead.
No,
It's
no, no.
exciting
We're
stuff.
right on track. I mean, it's on topic, and it's really interesting because when you look at this plane, you will notice it's like they pulled it out of one single sheet of fiberglass or whatever, right? Or whatever this fiberloy is, right?
Monolithic.
Yep, it looks exactly. We've got a picture that we kind of put in there. So
I've
the
got it pulled
wingspan
up.
of this thing is 32 feet. It's 28 and a half feet long. So, I mean, that's a traditional personal aircraft, right? More or less. It's about 9.5 feet tall. Its its weight empty is 2,150 pounds. And its gross weight is 3,400, which is pretty typical. Usually there's like a 1,200 or 1,250 pound kind of window for fuel and people. They assume kind of 250 pounds per person or 200 per person, and 50 pounds for luggage. And then, uh, depending on where you're at, how much fuel you need, how much fuel storage you have, you're allowing, 150 pounds or to 60 pounds of that, right? So that's pretty typical of a personal four-seater aircraft. The engine on that was a Continental IO. Is that IO or 10? That's IO.
It's
Can't
IO.
remember.
That's injected opposed.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. IO 520C is what they use to power that. There's not a whole lot more about it. Again, it's a very limited run. They're hoping to do more with it, but it didn't pan out. So, but it did bring the world of composites, and of course that pulled into, we'll call it the Rutan era, where Rutan said, "Man, we can do anything with this." And they really showed people the really incredible things, not just that you can do with this design construction method and that anybody could do it, but that you can that aviation wasn't as limited in form and shape as everybody kind of formerly thought it was. And he said, no, you can do all sorts of silly things with this. And he went and showed people, with, if you look at any of the Burt Rutan designs, I'm sure half of those look like, what do you mean you say you can't do that? Now, let me show you. Is what it feels like half of those designs were. So I urge you to go take a look. If you don't know about Burt Rutan, go look him up. It's really interesting. He kind of, I'll call him, he is one of the forefathers of composite aviation, and that he really kind of brought it and highlighted what it can do. I thought.
Yeah, certainly certainly popularized it. That's
Yeah.
for sure.
I will add to that he really pioneered what we call moldless construction, where you
Mhm.
take a shape and you're skinning it with a composite, fiberglass in his case mostly, And that really revolutionized that technique for the home builder. And if you haven't already, there's a fantastic period video, Rutan Aircraft Factory, that goes through all that, shows all of that.
Yeah.
So take a look if you're interested.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Take a look at that. And I can't urge enough going to the Arnold Aircraft Company website.
Yes, huge
Mr.
inspiration
Arnold,
for me.
right before he passed of cancer, he had been diagnosed. He realized what was happening, and he said, "This can't be hidden." I realize that's what we do to make our product, but I think people should know that anybody could try this, and that aviation should be an open door for people to go forth and let their imagine why see what they can do with it. I think they wanted to demystify it and show that it's not as you can do some. It's not that hard to do these amazing things. Clearly, by those videos, you're looking like, wow, that's a lot of like physical effort here and there, but you really can just come up with an idea. Granted, he's an expert at it at that point.
Look what you end up with, right?
Right.
That's the beauty.
Yeah. Yeah. He really did kind of highlight a lot of the pluses. Plus, it was really neat to kind of see. It's like, okay, well, what would I be in for if I decided this is what I wanted to try? Right. What am I in for? And you look through the whole thing, you're like, okay. And you can look and say, okay, that's not for me. Or, yeah, I think I could do that. It's worth giving a try. Let me build a tail, build a whatever, and see how that goes. Or in our case, let's build an RC airplane and see how helpful or good that is, right? Because if you do it and go, wow, this was easy and fun, then maybe that's for you, right? Maybe that's a window into full scale aviation if you're on that path. Or if you're just like, wow, I can do more things with my airplanes. I've got these concepts I want to turn into RC airplanes. I can use this method here and do different things with it because the material behaves differently than most others, right? Rarely are we using our design skills and our build materials as the monocoque, that shell, structure design. Most of the time, and with the foam board, that's kind of what we're doing. But for the most part, but most other methods are using more traditional structural methods with a balsa and whatnot, right? So, Red, why don't you give us? We'll call it the 5 minute introduction. The different types of construction methods. Yeah, I'm trying to because I've got a good example of some built up method with a number of pictures that we can kind of add in to a
Yeah,
presentation and kind of overlay in here. Unless you've got some pictures that you wanted to share.
I probably could dig some up, but I think in its most basic form, composites, at least as we're talking about them, is the use of a dry fabric that gets impregnated with a resin glue and is held to a specific shape to perform the function that you want. So composites can be, um, a wet layup, which means just taking a brush and literally wetting out the cloth on an external surface. So, the outside of a wing or a fuselage or something like that. Or
Hmm.
it can be laid into a female mold, which is usually a negative of the shape that you want to create. And you can essentially pull out, again, a monocoque type structure where you're take this flimsy fabric, but once it gets impregnated with glue and maybe has some reinforcements in key areas, you can pull that out and have a hard, usable shape. A great example of that is in the model airplane world. There are many, many aircraft out there, mostly kits, some ARFs that are fiberglass fuselage, and you'll look inside them, and they're very sparse on uh, structure, especially in the sailplane
Yeah.
world. Typically, the fuselage and the vertical are completely hollow. There is no structure except for maybe a post in the rudder to act as a hinge point. So, again, this hollow monocoque shell can become incredibly strong with very little wall thickness and little to no internal structure if done correctly.
Nice.
You know, in those examples, it's usually just the raw cloth. But in most cases, at least as it relates to aerospace, you're using a sandwich panel which means you have an outer layer, usually a foam core, but that could be a honeycomb core, could be an aluminum core, could be all sorts of things, and then another
So
inner
like a
layer.
lightweight spacer
Yeah,
that
it's
has enough
exactly what it is.
structure to hold the shape. Okay.
You're creating an I-beam is all you're doing
Yep.
by spacing these two inner and outer layers apart, and that becomes incredibly strong, especially in the world of composites as we know it. The strength to weight ratio is off the charts. It's insanely strong, to the order of you know you can't engineer an equivalent metallic structure the same way.
And the rigidity is worth mentioning as well as a separate separate from strength.
Yeah, a fantastic point. So a very poignant point as well. So just before we started this podcast, I'm talking with my structural engineer, and he's just finishing up the engineering data for the wing for my home built project. Now, the rules say I have to have a 6G wing to be legal. In other words, if my airplane with me in it ready to fly weighs 800 pounds, that wing has to be able to support 4,800 pounds roughly. However, I'm not designing my wing for strength. I'm designing my wing for stiffness. When an airplane is flying and the wing flexes, it's like a spring or a shock absorber. It takes energy out of the air and out of the system. The system is the airplane, right? So in a racing application, that's a compliant structure. Compliant structures are slow. Ryan is going to know exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm designing my wing to be incredibly stiff at the expense of being overkill in strength. So strength and stiffness are not the same thing, and they mostly are misconstrued that way by a lot of folks.
In the world I work in, where they're manufacturing chips on the nanometer scale,
Awesome.
flexure is critical. We are way under our utility. Oftentimes, most of our designs are for flexure and for stiffness, because we can't have vibrations travel through the building because it will ruin the product, right? So very similar, but totally different applications.
And this is another area where this is probably the area that I think leads to the most misunderstanding and folks thinking there is some black magic associated with composites is how do you properly engineer this? Now, yeah, great, but you know, you can grab a machinist handbook.
I see this big book and it's like, yeah, but where's the part where it tells me actually what am I getting?
Yeah,
how many layers I need or whatever, right?
That's right. So you can engineer an aluminum or a steel or a metallic structure pretty easily because it's a uniform monolithic substance, right?
Right.
If you're buying an off-the-shelf alloy of a known quantity, you can bet that it's good for whatever the strength rating it is. Now, composites are entirely dependent on how they're used. You can starve the layup, for instance, not put enough resin in. You can make it resin rich, which is too much resin. You can not bond it properly. So it's really, that's where I think the black magic comes in. It has to be properly engineered. So you really need somebody, if your life is depending on this composite structure, you really need somebody who understands how composites work and can do accurate engineering analyses. Now, when I started this project, my airplane, I knew I could build it strong enough, no question.
Right.
The problem is it would weigh as much as the Brooklyn Bridge, right? And that's not an efficient structure. So I had to find some people smarter than me to make sure that, was I being safe, which I was reasonably sure, because I can test that. I can try to bend the wing myself and load test it, right?
And I know you've got your 6Gs,
That's right. But again, I needed to be efficient with the structure. So the engineering part can be quite daunting for that particular application.
Well, yeah, I think for most people, for most applications, if you're really having to get to it and really determine the numbers, not by empirical, like, well, I built it, let's see. It's like, no, I want to predict it and make sure I have it. And then you can test it to see if what you understand is correct. Yeah.
Well, one, I don't have the appetite for that kind of cost or timeline. I could certainly do that, but I can't do that. It would never get done, right? I would never be finished with my project. And two, I'm, making as serious attempt as I can at, running with the front of this racing class. So I couldn't afford to not have the most efficient structure that I possibly
Yeah.
could.
Exactly. Brian, you were going to mention something.
It goes right along with what he was saying about the most efficient structure. Something a lot of people don't think about is that it all has to work together as a system. If you have one area where you're not you haven't quite figured it out, but you just, well, I'll overbuild this section. There's a snowball effect, because if I overbuild that section, all I'm doing is transferring the stress. I'm transferring the
Right.
loading down to the next section, which could then lead to a failure or something like it. You have to work it all the way through the system. So if you overbuild one part, you end up having to overbuild the next part and the next part and the next part and the
Right.
next
And the
part.
cascade down.
So
Yeah.
it's all about making it all work together as well.
You end up with a
Yeah.
non-flying car because it weighs so much.
Well, isn't that almost all of them, with the exception of a small handful?
Yeah. So,
There have
the
been a
nice
few
thing,
race cars that have flown.
Oh my God, it's so
Not
funny.
on purpose.
I hear,
Rob, you're
and that was
lifting,
another
you're
thing I
lifting
saw in the
down.
news. I'm sorry, what was that, Red?
I say the race car is trying to lift down. You want-
Exactly.
Yeah.
Keep on.
They
with
get it
that.
wrong sometimes.
Yes.
I bet.
Look up for the Mercedes CLK GTR.
Okay, going over
I think
backwards.
Road Atlanta was
That's
a
why they have the
famous one.
chicane there now.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
The nice thing about using, fiberglass or carbon fiber or something like that in models is other than taking a foamy and, completely covering it in carbon fiber, with a little bit of carbon fiber, you can overbuild to a factor of 2 or 3 or maybe even 10 in some cases, and it's not going to be that great of a weight penalty.
Right.
It's when your stresses get really high that you need to really pay attention to that efficient structure. So model airplane is a perfect example of the fly, break it, fix it, make it a little bit thicker sort of mentality.
Well, sure.
You can get away with a lot on a model airplane.
Yeah,
Yes.
but if you're like, well, I don't want to do this again. I want to do this once, and I want to do it well. So let's actually think this out. Matter of fact, that's part of what. So why don't we
I'll
talk
tell you
about? Go ahead.
one real quick thing. The biggest secret there, if you'd want to do it once, don't want to do it again, copy somebody else's design. That
Yeah.
flies. 'Cause
A
that's gonna
known
get you
good design.
Yeah, no, and that's honestly, that's always a good way to start when you're like, well, where do we begin? You go, well, that works over there. Let's start there,
Yep.
and then see how what we're doing we may have to tweak a couple things, but like that's a good start to get the
You
ball
can
rolling.
innovate from there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that applies for a lot of different things, even foam board.
Limit the number of variables.
I started with the GeoBat on purpose, right? Everybody talks about the GeoBat, and I watched it
No
fly,
good
and I'm like,
flyer.
right, it's a known good flyer. I didn't want this to have weird stuff going on. I wanted to be simple for beginners. So let's start with that and see where it goes, right? I modified some shapes and did some things, and that might make it really awful, but we'll find out. Same
You
idea.
limit the number of things you change at each step, right? You
What?
limit the number of variables.
Oh, shoot. Okay. I thought I could do them all at once. No, I know it's absolutely right. As a matter of fact, there's a couple interesting articles, scientists who are like, well, when we're doing tests and we're trying to figure out which ones had what effect, you can actually test 6, or I think there's a matrix. You can test 8 different things, and if you do them in a certain way, you can determine exactly what did, with 8 different factors, you can test like 3 times or 4 times, and based on what comes out, you can determine exactly what the problem was.
Yep.
Right?
It's called
Exactly which one did what. What is that?
design of experiments is what
Right.
it's called.
Exactly. And so you limit the amount of iterations, but get far more information from those couple experiments. And it's interesting because I was like, whoa. So that's good. Look that up if you're interested in it. Go look it up, because if you're looking to say, well, I want to do a bunch of different ideas, but I don't. You just have to understand it and carefully document. Is what I got from the video.
Very carefully.
Very
Yeah.
carefully, because otherwise you'll be like, oh, these results don't mean anything because I can't remember what was what. Kind of important. Anyway, all right. Before I get too far off track, I did want to start. I mean, we've introduced what a composite is, so let's look into what are the materials that we work with in RC and then maybe sidetrack. So, what are the fabrics that we use? What are the composites that we impregnate it with? Typically, uh, yeah, why don't we start there, and then we can see if that transfers over to aviation. Some of it obviously does, and some of it's like
Sure.
that's never going to make any sense there. Yeah, full scale aviation. Sorry, go ahead.
So I would say probably the most common things that we see in model aviation is fiberglass cloth and some sort of resin. The resin is usually epoxy based. It's not always epoxy based. That's probably the most friendly from an odor standpoint and a toxicity standpoint. But there is
Hmm.
also, um, polyester resin, which is very common in surfboards because it's
Okay.
cheap, but it doesn't play well with most styrofoams that we find in the hobby. So, um,
So it just
now
interacts,
we're
it
seeing more.
dissolves them, or
Yeah, it makes a gooey
okay,
mess.
okay, gotcha.
So surfboard foam, for instance, is a very, very dense closed cell foam, and
Yeah,
it's fine with polyester resin. But if you use polyester on a typical hot wire cut foam wing, like a Dow blue foam
yeah,
or a pink foam or a white foam, it just makes a gooey mess. So usually it's epoxy based. Um, Polyesters typically use an MEK type solution to as a catalyst, which
okay.
is toxic. It's you get it on your skin, you can inhale it, you get it in your eyes, all that kind of stuff. Whereas
Yeah,
epoxies are generally
there's a
pretty
lot of
benign.
warnings on that container.
Yeah. So like your epoxy, 5-minute epoxy, the DevCon epoxy that you use now, that's not a laminating resin because it's too thick, but you could thin it out and you could use it to impregnate some kind of fiberglass cloth. But there
Hmm.
are special epoxy resins used for that, even within the hobby. So West Systems markets to the hobbyists. They make a very nice epoxy resin system.
Okay,
Um, Bob Smith Industries, if you ever use Bob Smith CA glue, they
okay,
make finishing resin, and so does Zap.
okay.
Couple,
Yeah,
couple. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. They make a finishing resin. It's just an epoxy glue that's thinner and lets the epoxy wet out more easily.
okay.
Um, in some cases, you can wet out fiberglass with CA. It's pretty common on small models if it's on a substrate that's compatible with CA. I use thin CA to harden the fiberglass. Center section of a wing, for instance, on a wooden model, you could do that. Uh,
Okay.
you can also use things like clear varathane or water-based polyurethane. There are a lot of
Yeah.
different ways to harden these materials. It's the same sort of analogy as using, again, like brown paper and white glue. It's
Right.
very similar to
I,
that. Or
I was actually gonna suggest, like, I know that sounds probably inefficient because it probably very much is, but I saw somebody build a kayak out of effectively burlap sacks and wood glue. The water
it's
resistant wood glue, and they just put up a
That's a
couple layers
composite
of that
structure.
stuff and
Yeah.
just and put it
Yep.
together. And when it all hardened, it's like, well, it's ready to go, and off he
Yeah,
did.
it may not be the most efficient use of the volume of material. Right? You could use a different material to get the same result, but
Hmm.
I don't think anybody would argue that that's the most expensive way to do it, right? It's probably a very cheap way to do it. And if your goal is to
Yeah,
simply float your kayak and that's your requirement, then
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah.
So it's
You,
always a
you just
trade-off.
did it for you always did it. You just did it for a couple bucks. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
You,
a lot of hobbyists are always looking for what's the reasonable way to try this, right?
Yes.
Especially if you don't know.
Well, I've always said that even in any engineering problem, if you want it solved the most efficient way possible, you give it to a modeler and or a group of modelers, and eventually they're going to distill it down to the most basic solution, the easiest way to get that same thing done.
Yeah.
Um, I can point like foam board, right? Foam board has been around since I was a kid. I was doing high school or a grade school science fair projects, yeah, with foam board, right?
Hmm.
And foam board has only really been around the last 15 years or so in the model airplane world, right? It just took a modeler
Right.
finally to figure out that, hey, we can do something with this.
Yeah.
to realize that it is structurally very similar uh, to a composite with a foam core.
That's a sandwich core composite panel.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and one of the discussions is to put a very light. So, okay, put a very light fiberglass over top and just do a quick skin on it, and then that, like, quadruples the strength and then some. Even though
Well,
you,
Red had mentioned using a polyurethane. That actually works nicely to strengthen up foam board. You get
Yep.
a light fiberglass cloth, and you can use something like a polyacrylic or whatever polyurethane
Okay.
to strengthen the surface. I think some of the folks, and I've done on one of them, the Flight Test Sea Ducks. You can
Oh,
skin the bottom of it to reinforce it a little bit and make it a little more watertight as
right.
well.
Well, that's a good idea. Didn't really think about it that much.
It's pretty neat. Yeah, it's pretty neat. I mean, it's not as great as doing it properly with an epoxy resin, but
Right.
it's a nice inexpensive solution.
Cool. Okay. So, what other fabrics? You guys talk about different fabrics, right? And technically, any fibrous piece, right, is effectively useful, right?
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah. So I would say
You've got a
there's
piece of
probably
fiberglass up there.
Paper.
Okay.
yeah, it's paper,
Foam board. It's just paper is the
cellulose,
lowest.
paper.
That's where you start, right? You start with paper.
Okay.
Cool. But in the composite world, there are three main fabrics. There's a fiberglass, there's a carbon fiber, which almost everybody is familiar with those two, and then there's a Kevlar. And
Okay.
Kevlar is a synthetic material that you find in bulletproof vests, for instance. It's very good at abrasion resistance and buckling resistance.
Okay.
Um,
So it's a stiff
unlike
fabric.
car-
It's a stiff.
it's only stiff once it's molded. It's a fabric that'll drape. I could show you a piece if you wanted to see a piece of it.
Yeah. I mean,
The-
I've watched it. It's like normal fabric. It'll move around, but once
It's a woven fabric. Well, it doesn't have to be. It could be unidirectional too, but it's mostly a woven fabric. And you'll find Kevlar in the model airplane world, mostly in high performance sailplanes or high performance, molded jets. And it will typically be used in a place where you have antennas, where you need strength and you can't afford the bulk of fiberglass. So Kevlar falls somewhere between fiberglass and carbon fiber as far as stiffness goes, but it's RF transparent. So you'll be able to place your satellite receivers in a place where it can see through it, but it'll still have the advantages and strength of a composite structure. So you were talking earlier about a window, an RF transparent window. That's exactly what you use Kevlar and fiberglass for.
Right. Even though it'll look homogeneous with the surrounding structure,
Right.
it won't be transparent, but it'll be RF transparent, so it effectively becomes.
It'll be RF transparent. Yeah, it'll get painted or whatever you would normally treat it. You'd never know it's there. So
Okay.
I will add that Kevlar is also often more abrasion resistant than either carbon fiber or fiberglass.
for sure.
Okay.
So
well, I think. Go ahead.
I was gonna say there's one other place that it shows up very prominently in modeling, and it's in a molded airplane. It's usually a hinge of the flying surface. So you will mold in your controls, and it gets scored, and then the Kevlar flexes there. And the Kevlar is so strong that it won't break away, but you basically score it until the resin is gone, and you have a raw Kevlar, and that gives you a hinge. So that's actually something I'm doing on my airplane. It has Kevlar hinges.
Oh wow.
Yeah, the fibers of the Kevlar being plastic based are a lot less brittle.
Right.
Trying to think of the words. A lot less brittle than either the carbon fiber or the fiberglass individual fibers. So that they perform really well in that flexure case, and that's why they're good at, for abrasion resistance as well.
Excellent.
And
stopping
for
bullets
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Stopping bullets.
Because they stretch. Yeah, they stretch instead of crack.
I was wondering, do they stretch or do they? Well, I guess that's technically what elongation is when it's flexing. The one side is stretching, the other side is not. And
yeah, they're
the elongation.
So a couple quick things. Out of all the composite materials, Kevlar is my least favorite to work with because it is a pain in the butt to cut.
Yeah.
It is so strong, and it's very slippery. So a regular pair of scissors, it just pushes the Kevlar out of the way. So you go to cut it, and it just pushes it out of the way. So here's a tip for all you wannabe composite folks that when you buy a pair of scissors, they'll sell a pair of Kevlar specific shears, and they're usually like $80 or $100, right? Well, this is a pair of Quinn I'm not shilling for anybody, but I bought these at Home Depot. They're like $18.
Right.
And all I've done is I've taken this edge and I've run it on a bench grinder to make this edge porous, so it's like notched. Now these grab carbon fiber and don't push it out of the way. They hold it in the jaws, so when you cut, it will actually cut the carbon fiber. Brian's nodding his head too because he knows how much that stuff sucks to work with.
I haven't done much of it myself, but I've gotten to watch it happen live.
Yeah, it's a pain, but it's necessary in some spots. So if you have to sand it, it's horrible. Brian mentioned abrasion resistance earlier. I will, if I'm doing a layup with carbon, I will go to incredible lengths to make sure that it's nowhere near anything I need to sand, because it doesn't sand. It fuzzes up, and it's like rubber in that case. One tip is if you have to sand it, you can harden it with thin CA, sand it until it fuzzes up again, harden it, sand it, harden it, and it's a pain. So
Good tip.
I recommend not using Kevlar unless you have to.
Great tip. I'll have to make a mental note of where that is. Start adding some of these up.
It's one of those wrenches in the toolbox, right? You got to pick the right wrench for the right job, and there's some places where Kevlar is absolutely indispensable, and there's places where it is the worst thing in the world.
I
Usually it's the second thing.
Most times, yeah.
And I'm sitting there going like, well, so when I'm looking at like, okay, well, I want to build a composite plane, right? I'm sitting there looking at the materials, and I'm like, holy cow, there is so much, I'll call it beyond the composite, right? It's beyond the epoxy and beyond the fibers. Joe's got a cat that made an appearance, so hopefully
Trying to pet him
when we have the video up. But yeah, so it's one of those deals where you're just like, what in the world? Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of homework that has to be done in choosing the right fabric, because there's different weights, there's different weaves.
Right. Well, let's talk about that then with fiber. For example, let's pick one, right? Because every fabric has those items, right? They have different ways to weave. They have different, but they seem to be similar across the different fabrics, right?
There's a few different
let's
weave
talk about
types, and you can really go into the weeds with that. If you've got a couple minutes, I can grab a couple of samples to show you. But basically, most common weave is a twill or a 2x2, which looks just like a checkerboard, right? So
it's what everybody is familiar with the carbon fiber pattern.
Yeah, so you just have just a crosshatch that looks like that. Now a 2x2 will have two of these bundles next to each other, and they go under 2 and then over 2 and then under 2. So it's probably helpful to back up just a little bit to talk about what these materials are made out of, right? In the very most basic sense, they're just yarn. And these yarns are gathered into bundles called tows, and the tows are then woven into the fabric. Now, when you see, for instance, in carbon fiber, you'll see like a 3K or a 5K or a 12K weave. Now, what that means is for each one of those tows, a 3K fabric has 3,000 strands per tow. A 12K fabric has 12,000 strands per tow, right? So
it's the bulk of the yarn that's woven.
Correct. And they're all just string, for lack of a better term. And then they're woven into this fabric.
How is it different? And it seems like it's similar with Kevlar. How is that different with carbon fiber? Or not carbon,
it's not.
Fiberglass. I meant...
It's not. They typically don't go into tow count with fiberglass for, I don't know why. It's more prevalent in carbon fiber stuff.
So
because
they measure that what, by weight per yard?
Weight per square yard, or yard.
Square foot?
Or square yard, I'm sorry. I'm thinking volume and not area. But yeah, so typically the fabrics are classified by weight per square yard.
Okay.
Unless you're buying from Chinese website, and then you got to do gymnastics to get back to freedom units instead of fortnights per furlong or whatever they're using, right?
Right.
Sorry, that's my, never mind. There's a bad joke there. Great joke. But anyway,
Okay.
Yeah, so all the fabrics are usually weighted or sorted by weight.
Right.
The lightest of fiberglass, for instance, that we can find is usually around a 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce per square yard.
Mhm.
That's what's called a finishing weight, and that's what you would put on the outside of an aircraft that you were preparing for paint. So you're not necessarily using that for primary structure. You're just trying to toughen the surface, and then it'll hold a primer, and you can sand it smooth, and then put a scale paint job on it. That's pretty common.
Okay.
If you're building structure, you're mostly going to be working in probably the 3 to 6 ounce range, maybe up to 9
Okay.
ounce. That'll be a fiberglass fuselage in multiple layers, or maybe a blend of those. Maybe most of the fuselage is like 1 or 2 layers of 6 ounce, or 1 of 6 and 1 of 4, with some 9 in the firewall area or the landing gear area, or something like that.
Okay.
And go ahead.
No, that's I'm just
Oh,
noting, like,
I was
okay,
going to say,
so when you're doing a project, you're lining up like a bunch of, almost like with balsa, right? You're really building up with one size of balsa. You're saying, okay, well,
that's right.
this part of the wing needs 1/16 of an inch. This over here needs a 32nd. This needs some
Yep.
quarter by quarter, because this is
Yep.
the mainstay, yeah. And you got to pay attention to what's where, because it makes a
Yeah.
difference. And so same
You're
with
basically
fiber
sizing.
and carbon
You're
fiber.
sizing the fiberglass to the proper job. So, again, in the
Gotcha.
model airplane world, there's probably 3 or 4 weight fabrics that get used the bulk of the time.
Right.
And, as far as weaves go, you can kind of not pay attention to that. It doesn't really matter at the weights we're working with. Now, if you're doing a very pretty thing where you're going to see the weave, you might want to choose like a satin weave or a twill weave or something like that visually looks
Mhm.
better. Some of it drapes a little easier. So if you have a very tight thing that you're trying to skin or wrap or build this part in a mold or something like that, you might consider that. But
Right.
for the most part, you don't really need to pay attention to weave.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good to know.
And then
Other than for
carbon,
visual appearance.
correct. And even so, on fiberglass, it kind of doesn't matter because nobody wants to look at raw fiberglass, right? Everybody wants to
What?
look at
Come on, it's
raw
beautiful.
carbon fiber.
Right. No,
Yeah.
you want to,
So,
you're going to paint over that likely with a primer and then
yeah,
a paint coat.
yeah.
Okay.
Typically S glass is the most common glass that you'll find,
Right.
and it's easiest to work with. It drapes, it's soft, it's easy to wet out, things like that.
No, as I
And
understand it, what S glass is structural glass, right? That's
yeah,
as opposed to what other kind is there?
E glass, which is just a different weave. It doesn't have the same uniform structural properties.
Okay.
So S glass is basically the same in all directions, right?
Okay.
E glass, you got to pay attention to how it goes in if you want to optimize your structure for strength.
Okay. All right.
So that brings me to a great segue. Give me 30 seconds to grab
Yeah.
something. I'll be right back.
Go ahead. Brian, you have anything you want to add to that, or Joe, you have any question you want to make sure we bring up at this point?
Red's nailing it.
Oh,
All I can do is smile and nod
yeah.
and thumbs up occasionally.
Oh, he's speaking so far above my head right now.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. It's just
Well, I don't think Joe's really looked into the fiberglass world. Like, I literally have a couple buckets down there with a whole bunch of fiberglassing stuff. My goal is to make one. I want to make a Prandtl wing with fiberglass and have something a little bit more, I'll call it more durable and more um aerodynamically, I'll call it perfect, maybe a little bit better than the foam board amalgam that I put together, right? And so I've been looking at that. I also want to build a dragonfly. I want to hot cut the foam and then do a wet layup style deal. So I've looked into this
so.
and started down the path.
So
But that's part of what started this whole, like, we need to talk about this because there is it's a thing. I mean,
well,
it's
it's overwhelming with the amount of differences, and the
right.
truth of it is, once you understand it all, it's all the same stuff. A lot of it is brand name. A lot of it
Okay.
is a trade, a trade thing that they'll call their certain thing that's, Ford
Right.
versus Chevy, but they're both trucks or whatever. It's very similar. So I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. When you decide you want to do that, call me and we'll FaceTime, even if it takes a month of nights or whatever, and I will go through the steps
Okay.
with you, and we'll make that happen. All right.
You got to how early when I'm hot wire cutting the foam or after that?
I would start with the hot wire cutting of the foam. Yeah.
Okay, well I'll call you in a week after build
Yeah,
is
because
done. Yeah.
Well, because the making of the templates before you even cut the foam, there's a whole knowledge base that I can give you there that'll help you out. And if it's exactly. I can give you some pointers there to make your life a little bit easier, depending on how you're going to build it down the road. So,
Yep, absolutely.
Yep. So what I went and grabbed is just a piece of carbon fiber fabric. This is just a offcut.
Yep.
And I just wanted to show you some of the things about it. Now, carbon fiber, there are far fewer choices that the modeler needs to be aware of than what you'd find in fiberglass. And that's because, one, it's so expensive that, in other words, stuff that we use for modelers, it's going to be largely one thing, and that's what they call style 282, which is a 5.7 ounce per square foot regular 2x2 weave carbon fiber. So this is probably the cheapest carbon fiber you can find. Now you can find the lighter weights of this stuff, and this is a I want to say this is a 3K fabric.
Okay.
You can find lighter weights, but it's going to be insanely expensive. You can find this stuff for depending on how much you buy, $5 to $12 a yard, something like that for this.
That's that's really good. Actually, that's
wonderful. Yeah, not bad. So I've purchased a couple of 100-yard rolls to build my airplane. It's a little bit worse when you buy it like that, but it's the most economical way to do it. So what I'm going to show you here is, hopefully this will translate on camera, is I'm going to try to pull out one of these toes. So this is just, all right, so there's one PK bundle. I don't know if you can see where
one bundle
Let me try to pull
carbon fibers.
Of toes. Let me see if I can pull one out of the middle here, and you can sort of see this, right?
Right. So
there, you see it?
Grabbing one of the strands at the end of the weave and yoinking it out of the fabric itself.
You can see where I've pulled it out there.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
All right. So anyway, all right. So now I've got, this is called a toe, right? This is and these toes are bundles, and these are all fibers just in a straight line. So one thing that you have to realize when you're working with this stuff is it has not zero, but very little compression strength. You can push it and it just folds up. Yet this one toe would likely hold my body weight without any resin in it. If I just hung myself from it, that is enough strength to hold my entire body weight off of the ground. Intention. So you always have to think about composites in tension for their maximum strength. If you use them in compression, you're not using them properly. Well, I should say you're not using them to their greatest efficiency.
Right, you're not maximizing their use, right? You're relying on the resin's compressive strength to do the compressive work, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's not, you're going to be disappointed, and you end up with an overweight.
Yeah, it's very poor.
You're better off using balsa wood or foam board or something like that has better compressive qualities. So it has to be used correctly to be of any benefit, other than looking nice when it's clear coated.
Right.
So, for instance, on a wing, like let's say you're going to do a strengthen a spar, for instance, right?
Yep.
You would want all the fiber oriented along the span of the spar, and not, for instance, in a tube, right? A tube is a very weak structural member or use of carbon. A lot of guys will use, I put carbon fiber spars in. Cool, you kind of wasted your money, because you could have built it as strong with balsa wood or foam, and it would have been cheaper. So you have to be a little bit smart about where you use it, if you want to get the most efficient structure out of it. But if you're trying to brute force something, wrap it in carbon. If you don't care what it weighs or how much it costs, or the bulk of material, you're gonna get an amazing amount of strength out of it. So designed for tension and not for compression.
I gotcha. Okay, so compression members, ideally some other material. If it's a tension piece.
No, but just not necessarily a different material, but just used where it's oriented properly. So if you have, for instance, a sandwich panel, right? In compression, if it's bending, the top is going to be in tension and the bottom is going to be in compression. So if you have if you take the piece of foam board that Brian was showing earlier and you just flex it, the top is in tension and the bottom is in compression. So if you just orient this correctly, you can solve that problem.
With the okay.
Yeah.
This is a different way of thinking.
Yeah. And as an example, so I have a couple of carbon rods here from Windcatcher. This one is like a smaller one. You'll see this is they call it pultruded. And it's so all the fibers are all along the axis of the tube.
Mm-hmm.
It's a small diameter tube.
And it's impregnated with resin. Right.
And it's impregnated with resin, and you'll see a lot of these as spars because that's a very efficient way to use it. Then you'll also see ones that'll take the carbon, and if I can get it on the camera here, this is a woven turned into a tube. And this, while it looks way cooler, it's not nearly as efficient use of the carbon for like a spar application. This is more so it looks nice.
I'm assuming the long fibers are not perfectly aligned with the length of the tube itself, so you're not getting the full tension. You're getting.
Are you talking about it on this one
with the weave?
Yeah.
I mean,
Because
like
they'll
you said,
be
looks awesome, but it's not.
Yeah.
You're not getting the actual linear strength of the.
Yeah, it's definitely the woven one is definitely more for appearance, as Red was saying.
Yep.
And then the pultruded one where they're all aligned definitely works better because then all of the fibers on the bottom half when your wings flex, all the fibers are all in tension.
Right. It just you don't want that rod to crush because there's nothing holding the pultrusions from splitting at that point. So that's the weak part of something like that, where if you do get, and that's why I noticed with one of the items I have, they have an insert to make sure that it's solid, where there's going to be I'll call it a compressing force in the tube.
Yeah.
That way it's
Compression loads on pultrusions are horrible.
Pultrusions are awful, right?
Yes.
Because you're relying
split,
on the resin to basically do all of the compression resistance on that tube so if you're to push the top and the bottom of a tube, if you're not the sides split open.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what
Pushing
you'll
in.
see. So but if you fill the inside with the solid material, it will transfer the load straight through and it'll just do its work and not actually crush and split the tube itself. So yeah, it's really important if you're doing that kind of thing where you've got a ring and you're screwing a screw down to clamp onto your pultrusion. You need to have something in the hollow of that tube to take that compressive force.
You'll crush it and split it.
Yeah.
With an amazingly low amount of force.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about it, right, at all when I bought this kit, and it's clear that he's like, no, it's in the directions. And once I saw what was being asked, I'm like, that makes perfect sense because there's going to be there's we'll call it a stiff part, and then we'll call it the main part that has a little bit of flexure. It's going to concentrate the stresses at the difference of that joint, where that's bulky and thick and strong, and then the rest of the thing, it will concentrate that crush load at that joint. And if you don't have something in there, it's going to break apart. And obviously, they must have had that issue and either thought about it ahead of time or through testing figured it out. But I was like, oh, that's a really smart way to solve that concern, right? Like, good on them, and I appreciated that very much.
Oh, I grabbed another couple of things while Brian
he
reminded me. But this, a good way to add strength on the cheap if you want to start playing with composites is to buy tow. A tow normally comes on rolls, but you can buy this stuff. This is like $5 or $6 worth of 3K tow here. Now, in this case, you would use it to laminate where you want strength. Let's say you have a foam airplane that the wing flexes under G, right? So you would take this stuff and paint it on the bottom of the wing, much like you'd use fiber filament tape for. A lot of guys do that too. So a cheap way to basically not add any weight and add tremendous amount of strength by using this accordingly. Brian also mentioned a pultrusion there, and what I grabbed is a little bit larger pultrusion than what maybe most folks. Yeah, same stuff, man. So this is a 90 thousandths thick by half-inch wide, 100K protrusion strap. So this comes on a giant roll. See, in this direction, it's quite flexible. And this
Okay.
way, you're not going to get it flex if your life depended on it, right?
Right.
Now, the interesting thing about, if you look at the cross section of this, there's not a lot of area there, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are 25 of these total in the wing of my Formula One airplane that will handle over 15,000 pounds of weight across the wing, right? And not break. So, give you an idea, 25 bundles of this, we're talking an area about like that. That's all it takes to have a 25-foot span bridge that you could drive a semi-truck over.
Right.
Um,
That's awesome.
so,
Now,
and get
are you
I
incredible.
love that so much.
are you effectively
Right?
gluing them back to
Yeah.
back to back, kind of like
Yeah.
I'll call it a chassis on a car, where they basically strap a series of metal
It's like a
strips?
glue lamb beam in a
Yep.
barn or a house
Yep.
or something like that. You stack these up,
Yep.
and you end up with this lamination of stacks. And if the machine was big enough that could protrude a single unit in the shape of my spar, great.
You'd
But
have done
you
it.
don't.
Yeah.
You get pieces that are small enough that you can work with, and then
Yeah.
you bond them together. So
Really cool.
yeah,
Nice.
neat stuff.
That's awesome.
Okay. Good.
I want to,
Go ahead,
yeah,
sir.
I want to swing back on the tube carbon fiber for a second.
Mhm.
Brian, you had some tubes as an example.
Yep.
And yeah, there's there's flex to it. And based on the
Mhm.
conversation, the proper strength from that carbon fiber tube would actually be a intention this way, like a pull away, like you're trying to lengthen that rod. But that's not what
Yes.
what we would use it for. We would
Right.
Yeah, there you go.
wanna
There's
use it- we would want to use it as a spar, and maybe even like a spar to, like, if we were to do removable wing segments, to then like tie onto another carbon fiber rod. So what is it that, because you were saying that it's still got strength, so why is it coming from some of the resin aspect of it that it has strength? I recognize when it bends that the outside of the bend becomes tension, but then the inside of the bend you're putting in compression. So
Correct.
why do we still say that a carbon fiber tube can still be used as a spar? And maybe it's just the nature of our aspect of the hobby that we're not putting insane strains on them.
Yeah, the loads on what we put is, I mean,
Yeah.
it's
There's-
stupid
there's-
light compared to what it can do.
Yeah, there's two aspects of it, right? So most of the strength is in the bottom where it's in tension, right? You do get that's part of what the resin matrix adds, is that you get some strength in the other areas, but it's also, it's what Red was alluding to earlier, is that it's so overkill, right? This is not that much smaller comparatively than the pultrusion or the pultrusion that he was showing, and we're using this in, say, drastically lighter, a couple ounce airplane, so it's way overkill for that.
Well,
So it works.
Yeah,
It
so
works really well for it.
and it depends on how it's used, right? So
Mhm.
I used 2 tubes in my Clurican to join the 2 wing halves to the airplane itself. And when it crashed, because it went in pretty good and pretty hard, um, the wing loading was basically tension on the bottom and compression. I put them on the top and the bottom on purpose, because it's either going to, and it was fully sleeved, as it were, right? And so the goal was, I didn't allow it to flex. So if it was going to compress, it was going to compress the resin, which was far stronger than any foam board. So I figured, I'm going to bust the foam board before I bust the bar, as long as it's supported along its length and compression and in tension. That's what it's designed for. So generally speaking, as long as
Yeah.
I'm not bending it too much, and so what I ended up having is this giant 10-foot wing, and these 2 little carbon fiber spars on the top and the bottom effectively are the I-beam top and bottom. And I mean, it outperformed what I expected. I really did expect to have a failure. Whereas, for example, the carbon fiber tube, the big one the 19 millimeter one that we used for the Noob Wonders, same wingspan, roughly same area. And when that crashed, because it had two pinch points and it flexed in the crash, those pinch points caused the pultrusion to fail. It created a crush point and a pinch point, so it allowed the whole thing to kind of give. Now, if I had two tubes, one top, one bottom, it would have had a far less likely chance for it to have failed, the carbon fiber tube in that crash. Even though,
Did,
I mean, it may still have, because it was
did
pretty
we crack one of the carbon fiber tubes?
yeah, we did the one. The first one. We had an extra one. Not at flight test, but remember that first crash
Right.
that we went and there was lots of tears, and then we
Mm-hmm.
decided to rebuild 2 weeks later, or within 2 weeks.
Yeah, the
Yeah, that
second noob
original,
crashed, and then you had to
yeah,
rapid fire build it.
yeah, that one of the carbon fiber tubes failed
Oh,
miserably.
wow!
Yeah,
I missed
and
that
it
part of the
cracked
equation.
along
My
the
bad.
pultrusions.
I
Yeah,
would I would I would rephrase that in that the design failed.
however you want to put it.
I'm
So
sorry, I couldn't help it. I couldn't help it.
that's fine. It's okay.
It's,
It's
this is a
all
great
right.
example of what we
Go ahead, Red. I'm sorry.
say. This is a great example of what we touched on earlier about minimum gauge, and
Hmm.
exactly what Brian talked about earlier about moving the breakage down the chain, right? So if you use one of these carbon fiber tubes for a spar, totally fine. It's likely stronger than all of the surrounding material, right? Is it the most efficient shape for the job? No, absolutely not. In fact, I believe Brian was holding up a rectangular pultrusion earlier. If you were to properly design the spar for the load of the airplane, and you took the amount of carbon fiber that's in that tube, you could probably take about 80% of it away and have a more efficient structure, lighter weight. You don't
Yeah,
have the convenience of the tube. So we buy tubes and use tubes because they make great sockets. You can slide things together. They're not directional. So in other words, you can slide the tube in and out. You can twist it around, do all that kind of stuff. So it makes a lot of sense
yeah,
to use that, even though it's not the most efficient use of the material itself.
right.
If that makes sense. So
Plus,
even though
they're
we're
cheap
not
and
tensioning it
accessible,
this way, it's
right?
got good
Yeah,
enough
because
bending qualities.
this is only a couple of dollars, and that's
Yes.
that's why it ends up being popular in the hobby in this particular size and shape
Throw
because
shafts.
But like you
it's
said, if you were
yeah
trying to be efficient with it, that's not the best way to use that material. You know,
yeah it
Right,
is
and
not the
and
most efficient use.
and the
No.
rectangular shape, like that makes sense to me. It's not unlike a wooden ruler, or even a
Yeah.
metal ruler if you
Mhm.
want to be like that.
exactly
You know,
that.
take a foot ruler or a yardstick. I mean, I did it for the Nubatros, um, because of how thin I wanted the wing. I knew flex was going to be an issue. But Red, I took a yardstick and then put foam over it, but made a 10 foot. I think it was 10 foot.
Yeah, it was like
Was my
3 sheets of foam,
wingspan.
if not more.
It was about 10 foot was my total wingspan. So each
Apologize.
wing was 5 foot, and then like 6 inches or 8 inches of fuselage. It was fat, ugly, terrible.
Mhm.
But my yardstick was
That's great.
laid flat, and then I used the yardstick also to protrude and stick into the fuselage and bite into a little metal, a wooden section of the yardstick that I cut and slotted. And I knew that flex was going to be an issue, and it was because the yardstick was flat. It'd be like that rectangular carbon fiber we laid on its flat side. You know, I had all kinds of that thing looked like it was
Yep.
flapping to fly. But yeah, you flip it up on end and you can't. That makes perfect sense. And I guess the benefit is that carbon fiber is just of insane magnitudes more than even wood.
But yeah,
Yeah, for sure. And then if you're only engineering for strain in one direction, in case of a wing spar, if you're only looking at the moment, the tips going up and the center going down under positive G, right? Then it makes sense to have all your fibers running one direction. Now, the beauty of a tube is it's equal strength in all directions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, depending on how it's wound. I got to caveat everything, right? But that particular shape is uniformly structurally sound in that one direction, or in all directions instead of just one direction. And I have another example here of a spar that's designed for bending in one direction only. So this is a pultruded molded carbon spar. If you look closely, you can see the dihedral angle in it.
Yeah.
This is for a 10-pound model glider with a 4-meter span, and it's designed for a 25G ultimate load. Right, so you can do the math. So that's 250 pounds. This is about 14 inches long. It weighs about 8 ounces, and it's hollow. So if you look through there, this is essentially an I-beam structure with a 2 outsides and two insides, I'm sorry, 2 sides and a center. Right. This is insanely strong for what it is. I mean, if you hit somebody with this, you're going to crack their skull. It's insanely strong. So this is an example of a properly engineered joiner using carbon composites. Now the problem with this is it takes a high tolerance tool to make this, and then you have to have an equivalent mating sleeve. I'm scratch building a project. That's why I happen to have these parts here. But this is an equal sleeve that this slides into and creates a joiner system. But so this is a great example of 250-pound load, root bending moment. Actually, the root bending moment's off the charts. I'd have to do the math on that. But 250-pound ultimate load across a 4-meter span. Yeah. So to get this equivalent strength in a different type of material physically would be much, much larger than this. Even steel or something like that. It'd be probably
certainly much heavier
and way, way heavier. So that's where composites really benefit. When you need to engineer to the edge of the envelope, that's where you start looking at stuff like that.
Now I'm going to ask an off-the-wall question here, but related to our conversations. That sleeve. So you had your spar structure. You had a sleeve that socketed into, and it seemed like I won't say a snug fit, but it met up. And so you figure
tight tolerance, yeah.
You slide it in deep enough, and there's a load transfer. How well does that do forces from the first transfer to the second? Do they reinforce each other in some of those bend like those the flexing of, or are those?
Yeah. So with look at a tube joiner in a typical model airplane, right? You'll have a wing tube that slides into a socket. In reality, you only have to have that tube captured at 2 ends. You could leave the middle open, so you can have 2 rings and capture that tube, because it's a uniform bend or a uniform strength along the tube, and it will bend at an equal radius. So you don't have to capture it completely down the entire length in this like socket like you would here. So if you cut open your favorite brand ARF balsa wood model airplane that has a wing tube joiner, you will see most likely either cardboard or rolled paper tube in between the 2 capture points at each end of the spar.
Just to guide
the reason for that is to guide it. That's it. There's practically zero strength there. Right. So again, that tube is so overkill that you only have to capture, and I'm talking about left wing and right wing, right? So at the root of the wing and then somewhere near the tip, capture, and same thing on the other side, and then some sort of carry through structure through the fuselage.
A lot of times those will be ribs in the wing, and there'll be a hole in the rib that's a little bit reinforced, and that's to capture that load at the end.
Yeah, a second ring of the same plywood or balsa wood or something like that, and
and then now you've got enough, and then it's the sleeve is just so that it slides in easy and you don't get it caught on stuff, I suppose.
Because again, the tube is stronger than the surrounding material, so you don't need to constrain the bending moment of the tube because it doesn't matter.
Really cool.
Okay. Could you, though, with that sleeve around your insert, would any of the forces applied on the? Obviously, there's going to be a transfer of forces, but is there any reinforcement that's occurring with that if you had the sleeve go the full length? Is there any reinforcement, or is it just transferring of forces?
Well, it depends on how the wing is constructed. In a typical balsa built-up model airplane, no, because the sleeve doesn't touch any of the outer structure, and it's not a monocoque structure anyway because it's got a plastic film covering over it, right? In the instance of a giant scale 3D plane or something like that. Now, if you had a foam core wing and you had the sleeve and a full depth foam shear web that connected the outer skin, that's a different type of construction,
like a
and you
rattan
can
style
do that.
construction.
And you can that allows you to size your spar down from what it might otherwise take, but that takes some extra engineering, some extra tight quality control during the build process. Or you can just buy 50-cent, higher cost tube that's just the next millimeter up, and it does the same job without having to go through all that, right? So again, we're up against that minimum material condition.
Okay.
Is the thing strong enough to do the job, and is it stronger than the surrounding parts in the system?
Nice.
Fair enough.
So in my case, I absolutely do have to transfer that load from the spar to the outer skins because my wing is, again, a hollow monocoque. So this is essentially my wing. It's just this is a rectangular shape, and my wing is airfoil shaped. It's the same exact thing. And I would take the pultrusion and slide it in there. So if this is my wing skin and this is my pultrusion spar, it's going to go through there and transfer the load completely vertically, so that when I bend this thing, the loads are going to be transferred appropriately. So if
transferred evenly around the wing structure, the monocoque wing structure.
So
that
in my case, I'm
it's not
relying somewhat
concentrated.
on the skins. Yeah, I'm relying somewhat on the skins to transfer the load, not just the spar. So this goes exactly again to what Brian was talking about, having it work together as a system. I'm not engineering the spar to handle the load on its own. Once it's integrated and bonded into the wing, the skins also are a load path. So everything is distributed over a wide area as possible. And I can get away with essentially less material to do the same job. So lighter, more efficient structure.
It was also
Awesome.
some of the earlier. I think it was more World War II era, but maybe it was World War One. But as they started moving into the metal frames and the metal skins, they started incorporating the skin of the plane into the stress factors to fully transfer loads.
You nailed it. That's called a stressed skin structure. And composites are most efficient when used in that style of building.
Right. And the benefit of that, typically that design is that you don't have point stress transfer like you would with what are those rivets, with rivets and aluminum, because that's what you end up at. You have the skin, and that's transferring that load directly to the ribs, but it has to transfer through the rivets. That's why you have so many of them, so it's transferred along the whole skin. But you're
If you're going to punch
concentrating
holes and
those
put rivets in anything,
yeah,
build it out of
you've done
aluminum
it wrong.
instead.
Yeah, but so by
Stress
creating a
concentration.
rib and creating a monocoque structure that is connected the entire length of that rib, you're transferring evenly across that entire surface of the rib, and it's not a point load transfer through and into the rib. It's a smooth load transfer across the entire structure, which is
It's integrated through the whole structure.
Right, exactly. So, and that's the difference between, and that's why when you're looking at like the RV-12, I think recently there were people who are a little concerned about whether or not there were hole elongations,
Laser
when
cutting.
right, laser cutting versus punching, and how that, and ultimately ended up coming to nothing really, which is good. That's good because that means that what they did was good. It just stinks that it took the effort that it did to come to that term, but it's good that it went through it, because that really, honestly, that helped me understand that. Oh wow, that does become, there could be that little difference possibly between the one and the other could really play a big difference in load transfer and longevity of the product, right? Like if you
A great stress skin example that anybody can build at home for zero money, or as close to zero as you can get, is take a sheet of paper and realize how floppy it is until you fold it into an airplane, right? You didn't change anything structurally with the material whatsoever. You've only creased it in ways to take advantage of the fibrous content of the paper, and now you have a flying machine, right? So it's
pretty rigid.
very, very similar with composites.
Oh.
Yeah, and I was gonna think if you wanted to look at that also, take a 3-ring binder and a piece of paper and pull on the paper and see what it does to the holes. That's what's happening in the
Yeah,
airplanes at the rivets,
Yeah.
that's right.
which is
And
yeah, which is
it's
why
a
when you
and it's
reinforce those little rings at the ring, like all of a sudden your paper won't tear out at all because you've got that little bit of extra of what it needs. Hey, go ahead.
and it's a good it's I was just gonna say it's a good place to understand the difference between the stiffness of a structure versus the
Any
strength of the
material.
structure.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
yeah.
It's really I'm really glad we're going. This is like half my bailiwick. I love this. This is the best.
And I did have one other well, I've been holding this for a while. One other tip that for a lot of the people who are listening, a lot of us build the foam board airplanes that are, very inexpensive. And we talked about the doing, a tube for a spar, but just getting some of the really cheap carbon strip. This is a little big, but like a 5 millimeter by half millimeter thick, and just cut a slot or put it down the side of the foam spar and just glue it down, or cut the slot, press it in, and put some glue down on it for to add a lot of rigidity for
Immense
almost
strength.
almost
You
no
get
weight. Yeah, immense more strength, a lot more rigidity,
Right.
and it's very inexpensive, and virtually zero weight, relative to the lightweight foam airplanes.
I
Well,
don't think a lot of people realize that when you embed something in we'll call it a continuously supported format, right? That's what you're doing when you're putting that strip in there in the foam. The foam is continuously, not a lot, but continuously supporting we'll call it the floppy direction, right, of that strip. Which means so when it that floppy is trying to stress. When it fails, it's going to rotate as it stresses, right? As it fails. But if there's foam keeping it from rotating because it is keeping it supported along its length, it increases the
Mhm.
strength value of that normally weaker direction or in the fail. It increases that failure mode, the strength level by a significant amount, which is why in buildings, you have a bunch of supports along the way in the form of either your concrete deck or you have a support beam bust, kind of connecting in along the we'll call it the carrying beam. That beam is 10 times stronger because of those beams kind of attaching into it and having that bigger beam carry the load. If it didn't have any of those, it wouldn't have as much capacity. It's
so,
the
but
tighter the support values, spacing, the better off it is. That little bit of foam, as weak as it is doing a tremendous job to increase the strength of that strip.
It's keeping it
that,
bending this way instead of
And then
this way.
right, instead of bending in
Yeah.
the weak direction.
so, so what Brian talked about doing there is, slitting the foam fan wise and putting, carbon top and bottom or whatever. You are in effect building an I-beam. You
Yep.
just
Exactly.
you just built
Exactly.
a sandwich composite I-beam, which is insanely strong. Um, you'd be really surprised how little carbon it takes to put across just a raw foam core for you to be able to stand on it.
I'm about to
And
find out. That's why I have this.
yeah, it's a
Well, it's
little
just
tougher with toe because the way these protrusions are done, they're put through a heated die impregnated with resin, and they're stretched with incredible force to maintain the fiber orientation completely straight.
Right.
With your toe, you're going to have little wiggles and stuff, and it's not under tension,
Right.
so you're not getting the maximum out. But it's a really, really good alternative.
Right. Well,
Um,
yeah. I
what?
was gonna do one layer of fiberglass, a layer of toe on top and bottom of the main spar of those bigger wings, and then doing another
Mhm.
thing of fiberglass on top, and then that way it's just this really long, rigid. And I wasn't even gonna talk about the to resist twist, putting a kind of a diagonal coil, to make sure that when it's trying to twist, it's going to encounter the structural
Yeah,
capacity of this in either one direction or the other. That's what they do in helicopter blades, and what they do in
yeah. For
some
fighting torsion.
right, to combat torsion. But
Yeah,
you can, if you orient it in certain ways and you limit how often it goes one direction versus the other, you can predict under load how it will twist, which means you can create during a heavy load situation a slightly, we'll call it Prandtl twist, naturally occurring because it's weaker in that way, so it will twist as it gets overloaded. and creating.
So now you're talking about
Yeah.
aeroelasticity, which is a whole nother really fascinating thing to deal with. And someday when we have more time, I'll tell you about how I'm incorporating that on the wing on my racing airplane. But yeah, it's very cool.
You know what I just
I don't know how
heard?
much time you guys have.
We're going to have Red
Another
back.
episode.
Yeah, we're having Red back.
One quick
it's
tip
good.
I want to give you, especially when you're using tow like this, is you found out earlier about stress risers, whether you realize it or not, because when your airplane crashed, it broke where the carbon stopped, right?
Mhm.
Because you create a stress concentration where it's super strong and then it's not. When you put your tow on your airplane, your spar or whatever, take the toe. I realize how dark this is. Really hard to see.
It's okay.
If you take the ends of the toe and spread it out, kind of
Right.
like a paintbrush. I don't know if you can see that.
Yep.
Yeah.
This will dissipate the stress out the end of the individual fibers instead of being truncated in a stress riser at the end of a blunt toe.
It will
Here we
be
use my
also
I
5
like
head.
that.
less
My
likely
5
to
head, you can
slip
see it.
in the resin, right? Because it can't go.
Well,
direct.
it will be more uniform strength concentration.
Yeah. Yeah. Good.
So just it's one less. It's moving the failure further down the chain.
Right.
Yeah.
You notice we keep talking about the same sorts of things.
Yep.
It's very simple concept. Just use it in ingenious ways.
It's turtles all the way down. Okay. So let's say we talked about the kinds of fabrics. We talked about the kinds of resin.
And that was like an hour on fabrics.
I know. Oh, man, I know. Look, well, it's so you need. I feel like it's important. Though I'm not upset with that. That's a good thing because it's important to understand the role it plays because it affects how your structure will react to load when it's done.
Yes.
Right. It's critical.
Yep.
Also, like if you cut in the linear, right? It's kind of with any kind of fabric. Cut in the linear, it is stiff in one direction, but if you cut on the bias, which is on an angle, like a 45 to the actual direction of the fabric, you can lay it over any shape, right? But if it's in the one, it's kind of just straight and it's only gonna lay in certain ways. But if you go again on the bias, which is a 45-degree, right? That's what it's called.
That's
you
right.
end up basically allowing the fibers within the weave to move ever so slightly to conform to whatever shape.
Well, that whole checkerboard thing, it'll bend and conform around
Right.
odd shapes.
And that's how you can get that fabric. It would normally probably not be able to bend as much as you want it to without breaking.
That's right.
To be able to do
If you have
that
a
and
if you have a
conform to the shape.
complex shape, an inside corner or a wingtip or something like that, put your fabric and lay it on the bias. So if your wingtip is just imagine it being horizontal, right? Don't put your fabric on like this where it's 0-90. Orient it like this where it's on a 45, and so that you're not directly bending the toe
In
like
line
this.
with the toe,
If it's on a 45 like this, you're creating this kind of X pattern. It'll bend much more easily this way. You're not directly bending any fiber along its length.
Nice. Okay, so let's talk about layups, right? Layup types, because as I looked into this, there's two major types that I saw. It's for RC, and it seems like in general, right? Boat building, building a car gasoline tank, or whatever, it's either wet layup where you basically put down resin enough, and I got a question for you on maybe a tip on what's the guide on how much, but basically you put it down, you cover the surface that you need to go, you put the fabric down, and you just make sure that it's wetting through the fabric, or you put another layer of epoxy on top so it's fully sandwiched, and you have a fully, like you said, fully wetted, so it's covering all of the surfaces of the fabric. Period. Right. And what happens if you do both the top and the bottom? It will saturate likely, and you'll have to squeegee off a good portion unless you're doing
You
it carefully.
can. Yeah, you can. So there's a couple. We're going to go
What's
down
the
the rabbit
preferred
hole
method?
into cloth handling a little bit. Well, it depends. It's as as you might guess, there is no preferred method. It depends on what you're doing. So if you're
I mean,
doing a
that's for wet
complex
layup
shape,
we're talking about, right?
yeah, absolutely. We're going
Okay,
to
go
talk
ahead.
about all the crazy wet layup ways to do this. So if you have, let's say for instance, you're doing a mold of a fuselage, and you're doing a negative, a female mold. You're putting the cloth inside of a mold. And you're
Mhm.
trying to hold that shape. Often it's easier to put a layer of resin in and then push the cloth in, because the resin will act like a binder and hold the cloth in place while you're
Mhm.
working it to wet it out. If you're doing a large flat shape, like you're doing the exterior of a wing, I prefer to lay the cloth on dry and then smooth it out really nice and then wet it out on top of that, starting from the center moving outwards. Now that's especially important if you're doing really light cloth, like 1/2 ounce or 1 ounce or 2 ounce. Don't try to wet your part first and then put the cloth on, because it'll just be a mess. You'll never get it smooth.
Okay.
If so, it depends. Again, so if you find you have you need to get the cloth to stick into a mold or some odd shape, wet it first a little bit, and then push the cloth into it, and then stipple it with a brush. And you can come
So,
back with
like wet it on a like lay a sheet of plastic, wet it there, move it over,
sorry,
or
no, different. We'll get to that technique too. That's a great tip. No, wet your mold out, wet your fuselage out,
Okay.
whatever part you're gonna cover with the
Okay.
fiberglass or carbon first, and then put your dry cloth down, and then use depends on how big of a thing you're doing. I use a
Yeah, right.
roller a lot of times. I use a trim
Okay.
roller if it's a
Yep.
large thing. But if you're doing model size stuff, 1-inch chip brush. And don't buy expensive brushes. Buy the cheapest crap brush you can
Yeah,
buy.
because you can't
And
recover them.
no, don't even try to clean them. It's absolutely futile. I know some guys swear by it, and they're wasting their time. You spend far more time and money and acetone trying to clean your brushes
Oh
than
my
throwing
God.
away a 50-cent chip brush, right?
Okay, gotcha.
Um, Another tip is glue the bristles at the base of the chip brush where the ferrule is, the metal ferrule. Run some
Yep.
CA around there. Pull all the excess hairs out first. If you're trying to do a nice layup and you're trying to get a clean,
Okay. Yeah.
clean part, glue the hairs in, because they'll come out, because they're cheap chip brushes. It's the same reason you
Right.
bought them in the first place, right? Is a
Right.
bad thing.
That
Okay,
makes
so
sense.
that's a direct wet layup. Now, what you alluded to earlier is about wetting the cloth out between plastic. And
Mm-hmm.
that is a fantastic method for doing usually flatter things. Not always, but usually. So what you'll
Okay.
do is you'll like a painter's drop cloth or something like that. The
Yep.
thicker the
That's what
better,
I've seen. Yeah.
honestly. Uh,
Okay.
you
Is that because it stays
put
stiff and it doesn't try to wrinkle as you're trying to work
yes,
it? Okay.
exactly. Pour the resin on, close the plastic, use a squeegee like a Bondo spreader. Uh, spread your resin on it so it's all saturated, and then squeegee it out so there's not much there. You take all the puddles away, right?
Right.
Then you cut your rough shape out that you want. Peel one side of the plastic off, leaving the cloth on the other side of the plastic. Lay it down over what you want. Smooth it out, and then carefully pull the plastic away.
Okay.
Or leave the plastic on for a shiny finish.
Okay.
So there's a couple of ways to do that. That leads down to another rabbit hole of making a nice finish with a wet layup. How do you do that if you don't have a mold? Let's say you have a wing and you want to make
Right.
it a nice fiberglass or maybe carbon fiber finish. You do the same thing essentially, but you use a mylar, which is about 10 thousandths thick. It's a stiff plastic, in other words. So it's like
Like
it's
the
not
balloon material.
no thicker than that. It's like
Okay.
a playing card stiffness, right?
Okay. It's a thick
You would,
mylar,
you
but
would
it's
wet
the
out,
same material.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, like a not as thick as a credit card or stiff as a credit card, but more like a playing card, I guess.
Yep. So we used to use them for permanent plans. So back in the day when I was young, as a young engineer, we'd be the engineer of record for
Yes.
many
Back in
townships.
my day.
Yo, come on now. Hold on. Let me get my cane out. I'll show you. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Red. No, but so the final plans when we were done, or they were the old ones, they were on this thick plastic, basically mylar.
Yeah.
And they had a
Yeah, they're inked.
coating to take the ink on the one side. And you know, when you erased it, you would like erase through that. That was a mess. Anyway, but
Yeah,
that
I remember.
that's yeah, yeah, I bet you do. So that stuff is what you're talking about, like that kind of thickness
Yeah,
and stiffness.
something like that. So you can use almost anything, but this it's got to be stiff enough to hold its shape, but flexible enough to get around the airfoil or a wingtip or a leading edge or something like that. So
Okay, yeah, gotcha.
you would wet your material out on this mylar, and then you would place the foam core wing in this case in the middle, and it gets sandwiched together.
Right.
And then you either weight it down with a bunch of weight, or you
Sand or yeah.
vacuum bag it down, right? And
Right.
then when you peel that mylar off, the surface of the mylar will give you a shiny finish on whatever your fiberglass
Okay.
or carbon fiber or whatever it is. It has to be waxed with a release. We haven't even talked about releases yet, but you've got to be able to peel the mylar away. But
Right.
they're usually Teflon based, so they usually come off. But
Okay.
there is a wax and a release film that can go on there.
Okay.
So you can do the same thing with the plastic too. So if you like, again, I keep going back to the center section of a wing. In the old school, we
Right.
build a balsa wood model airplane. We'd add fiberglass to the center section. Well, you can leave this plastic on one side of that, and then when you peel it off, you have a reasonably smooth finish that you don't have to go back and fill, and just makes for a nicer finish down the road.
Okay. That's awesome. So when I see the vacuum bags, they are either using some sort of like mastic to make a bag, or they have a
You
three-sided
can make it.
bag and
You can make it out of anything. You can make it out of anything you want, as long as it holds vacuum.
air. You
It's
vacuum, yeah.
fine. Now they
Okay.
they make specific products for that, and in some cases it makes sense to use those. Like I have behind me,
Right.
probably can't see it, but in my composite rack right back here, I have two different kinds of bagging film. One's a stretchy bag and one's a hard bag.
Okay.
Stretchy bag is for weirdo shapes that are not flat-ish.
Right.
Works well, easy to use, but you can't ultimately pull as much vacuum on a stretchy material as you can on a rigid material like a polyethylene
Okay.
bag, right? But you can use anything, shopping
Which
bag.
means you're not going to minimize the amount of as much of a composite or epoxy, right? Like you
Well, you're
can't
gonna have-
pull
you
as
could-
much epoxy out of the matrix.
Well, it's probably not going to compact as much. So your
Okay.
final laminate might be a little thicker, which means it's going to carry more resin, which will ultimately be a little bit
heavier, yeah. Okay.
The very optimum ratio for a hand laid up part, even vacuum bagged, is going to be about 50-50, about 50%
Okay.
cloth and about 50% resin. So as
So
a
if
good
you're-
rule of thumb,
if you
you can
cut out, I was going to say, if you cut out your shape of your glass or whatever you're covering with, you say, okay, this weighs, you
Yep.
weigh it, and it's like, okay, this is 1.5 ounces. So then you make 1.5
Right.
ounces of resin, and hopefully
Yep.
that will be the right amount to cover the whole thing and properly
by
bring
weight,
it-
and then your part is going to be double that, right? So you'll be 3-ounce total part because you have an
Right.
ounce and a
When
half of
it's done.
cloth, ounce and a half of resin.
Okay.
You can blot out excess resin. I like to use toilet paper. It's very fine and it doesn't leave hair. So you can take toilet paper and blot out any puddled resin, something like
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Most hand layups are the other way around. They end up being about 40% cloth and about 60% resin. That's just human error, right? You can't get the
Right.
perfect resin ratio everywhere. It's just not possible. Pre-pregs, it's about 60-40 the other way, 60% fiber, 40% resin. And that's about the
Okay.
ultimate fiber to resin ratio.
Okay, so that's what you're aiming for ultimately, but I mean, you're in the normal way, you're not, unless it's pre-preg, you're not going to get it.
Yeah, and just for those of you who don't know what pre-preg is cloth that comes pre-impregnated with the resin. Usually it's frozen, and you have to keep it cold until you get it out, and then you lay it in your mold or on your part or whatever, and then it has to go through usually an oven or an autoclave to get it to
Right.
cure. Now,
Right.
I've
And
got
it's there
another
for-
great
there
tip.
for a while, right? It's like it's not just a simple put it in an oven, wait a while, take it out. It's no, you put it in and then you let it slowly cool over time, and then it takes days. And
Not necessarily. It depends on the system and what you're building and how thick the laminate is and all that kind of stuff. But
okay,
single or low single layer laminates, they can cure for an hour to 3 hours, something like that.
Okay.
And yeah, a ramp time of about half a degree per minute is about the industry standard. Again, it depends on the resin system that you're using, but
That sounds
yeah,
expensive
but
for
a
the average
but a
overseer.
hot but a hot box but a hot box with a 100-watt light bulb in it, made out of 1.5-inch styrofoam underneath your bench, is a great curing oven, and that's all you really need. You only need to get it up to around 80 or 90 degrees for
Okay.
most RTC resins, which is room temperature cure. Your West systems, your MGS, your ProSet,
Right.
HTRs, things like that, they'll all do that.
Okay.
Now, another great tip I can give you that I only recently started doing this, and recently I mean like the last 10 years, is you can actually make your own poor man's PrePreg. In that, you'll take your West system or whatever resin system you're using, you'll wet out your cloth in between plastic, just like you normally would,
Yep.
and then you roll it up and stick it in the freezer.
Yep.
And then when you're ready to use it, you pull it out, you take a heat gun and you warm it up a little bit so it lays flat. You cut your patterns out. You lay it in your mold or whatever you're doing, and use a heat gun to get it to start to cure, not necessarily cure, just warm up so that it's malleable. And then it's a room temperature cure once it comes up to temperature. And that's a fantastic low mess way to do molded parts. Not necessarily production, although you could do production that way, but I like it because it's clean and that I'm not slopping resin around if I want to lay up a quick part. So if I'm laying up,
Right.
a cowling or a canopy or something like that, and I might build a couple of them for my buddies or whatever, I'll just make some PrePreg and I can lay one up a night and I can do the whole layup in like 10 minutes because you're just warming it up, press it in, and then go on about your business. So
That's awesome.
yeah, it's just a neat way to handle it.
Was that one of the Arnold videos at the end of the series or something? Or they're showing like one of their workshops, and it looks like that's what they're doing with, they're basically laying out a bunch of plastic. They're impregnating sheets and sheets of this, and then covering it the other side with plastic. And it looks like they're doing that so that they can basically take their time with getting it on the model or getting it on to do the.
I
I can't
don't
remember
recall that
if it was
being
Rutan. It was a
an
Rutan
Arnold
video.
video, but
Yeah, it was one of those, with the wet layup style construction, where it's foam
so
core wing with a stuff on top,
yeah.
right?
Usually the plastic is done because it makes it much easier to handle larger quantities of material.
Yeah.
You'll notice that any fabric, particularly heavy strand or heavy tow carbon like this, it will distort very easily, especially when it gets wet, and you can start having
Weird looks.
distortions in the cloth, right? And by putting it on the plastic, it keeps those distortions from happening, and you can lay it out onto the whatever you're working on and keep it reasonably intact
Yeah.
by cutting, with a template, you can be very close to the final shape without having to press it all in wet and then come around and trim all your excess off.
Right. Nice.
That's most likely what you saw, unless they were doing
Yeah.
something else. But once you mix the resin, you're racing the clock, right?
Right. So
It's
give me
curing from the second you start stirring.
Okay. So let's talk about some quick things about resin. They come in different times, and they also I've heard a lot of tales of like, hey, get it out of the bucket as soon as you can. And I could you
Yeah,
talk
so
about
that's
that?
well, what they're talking about avoiding is an exothermic reaction, which means this chemical reaction between the resin and the catalyst makes heat. And if you have it in a bucket where the heat is or the material is all concentrated, it'll exotherm and it will cure and harden prematurely. It can be quite violent. In the quantities and the types that we use in the hobby, that's not really that common, especially with epoxies. It's pretty common with polyesters, though, if you're doing surfboard type stuff, especially if you're putting what they call a hot coat on or a hot mix where you over catalyzed it. That's okay with polyester. That's not okay with epoxy. That will significantly weaken the matrix.
Okay.
But yeah, once you stir it up, I like to either pour it out, put it in a plate, or I have a pump, so I can mix very small batches quickly. I don't have to weigh it out. I can just put the cup under there. I want 1 pump, or I want 10 pumps. Mix it up, use it. But if you're doing it at home, go ahead.
I was going to say that's one of the big selling points to some of the major systems like the West and the Total Boat and stuff like that. where they have
Yeah,
a whole
West and
setup,
Total
so you
Boat.
can just boop boop done.
That's right. West is good hobbyist resin. I don't care for it for structural stuff. It's a little bit rubbery, but it's
Mhm.
fantastic glue, and it's fantastic for making repairs and things like that. Now, if you're just starting out and you're going to mold a fiberglass fuselage, use West. It's fantastic.
Okay.
If you're trying to get the highest engineered structure you can, there might be a better resin out there, but certainly not for the price. West is a
Mhm.
fantastic resin, especially when you consider they have the nice metered pumps. So you can do 1 squirt of resin, 1 squirt of
Right.
hardener, or 10 squirts of resin and 10 squirts of hardener. You don't have to weigh anything.
Right.
To me, that's worth its weight in gold because, using a scale and all that is a giant pain in the posterior.
That's what it looks like. Okay. Let's see. So
I
by spreading it
I had a
out, you're not concentrating the heat, and it
That's
does
right.
not
Just
prematurely
greater
harden.
surface area,
Right.
relative to the volume.
And if you're saying I've got a 60-minute epoxy, it means you have 60 minutes of working time from mixing to hardening,
At
to
whatever temperature they
workability.
specify that, and in whatever quantity.
Okay.
So if it's hot that day, it's going to go off quicker. If it's in a big pot, it's going to go off quicker.
Okay. All right. That's good to know. Thank you. Brian, you had a question?
Yeah, it actually steps back a little bit. You were talking about I think you called it poor man's pre-preg. When you do you do anything once it's between the 2 layers of plastic before you put it in the freezer? Do you do anything to expel any excess resin? Do you roll it
Yeah.
out, or do you
I-
hit it with put it between 2 rollers or something? Squeeze it?
No, I just use a squeegee, and I do it whether I'm making
Okay,
pre-preg or if I'm just wetting out the cloth. But what I want to
fair
see is
enough.
a uniform color and wetness, and then I squeeze out all the excess resin off of the ends. And then if I'm making pre-preg so that I keep my wife off my case, I cut those ends off so it's not puddling.
Mhm.
And then I roll it up, and then I'll put it in another piece of plastic so it doesn't leak on the chicken or whatever that's in the freezer.
I was
Right?
going to ask you, do you
So
have a separate fridge for that?
I do,
Some
yes,
people
but
have a
in the
like a
early
little
days
fridge
I
in their
did not.
garage where they, you know,
Yeah.
nice.
I have
Composite chicken.
a chest freezer.
Okay. Is that usually where you put it? You put it in the freezer? Okay.
Mhm.
Good. Cool. All right. So,
And every system will have a certain amount of time where it'll be fine frozen. Like if
yeah.
I left stuff in there for a year and it's junk, you're really looking at a week to a month sort of
Right.
timeline to use
But
the stuff.
but it allows you to kind of plan it out a little bit better.
Well, I only have to get dirty once, right? I only have to, use up 1 mixing bucket and 1 stir stick and 1 set of gloves and all that kind of stuff. I'll use gloves again when I'm using it, but I can wet out a large enough quantity that I can use it for whatever project is foreseeable. And I can do those multiple layups over multiple days, and I never mix resin beyond that first time, which is a huge time saver.
Yeah.
And if you have folks that don't like the smell of epoxy, that helps because it's not making all that odor. Although
Mhm.
epoxy I find is non-problematic, but some people have issues with it. So
Sure.
it's better for batches.
Okay. Good. All right. Well, let's move to, so that's generally the wet layup style. Let's talk about the vacuum bag or the infusion method briefly. There's a lot of videos, especially from epoxy manufacturers. Let's talk about the pluses and the minuses, maybe. To briefly talk about the system, kind of what that is,
Sure.
and then the pluses and minuses.
Sure.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
a good resource is Easy Composites. If you're not familiar with their YouTube
Mhm.
channel, check out their YouTube channel. It's not exactly suited for model airplane style stuff, although a lot of it overlaps, but they're doing
Right.
bigger stuff, so it's applicable. Okay, so what you're talking about is how do you compress the layers into an efficient structure? How do you extract as much air out of the layup as you can so that your fiber and resin ratio is as close to optimal as possible?
Okay.
So the way we
That's
do
the
that
goal.
is with a vacuum. Yeah, so we pull a vacuum on either the mold or on the part um, to expel the excess air and to compact the fibers, pushes it into corners on a female mold, for instance, and
Mhm.
generally makes a nicer layup. A vacuum does not cure everything, A poor layup won't be fixed by a good vacuum, but you can ruin a good layup by doing a poor vacuum. So it's
Okay.
a little bit of a trade-off. Now, resin infusion is a very similar process with only a few differences. In a resin infusion, you have a female mold. You'll put your fiber into the mold dry with no resin, and you'll add a couple other pieces of material inside underneath the vacuum bag. One is a flow media, which is a plastic grid.
Mm-hmm.
And once the whole thing is under vacuum, you basically have another inlet into the vacuum. You stick that inlet into a pot of resin and you uncork it, unclog it, and it will pull the resin out of the bucket into the layup, and the vacuum will distribute the resin evenly throughout the entire layup. Now, if you're curious to see that work, I believe on my, not to plug it again, but my YouTube channel has some of that. I believe there's a
Well,
pretty good short there that shows that. But
yeah, tell people where they can go check that out, because it is a wealth of
yeah,
composite examples.
it's the YouTube is just / Red Jensen, REDJENSEN, or you can search Impulse IF-1 on YouTube and you'll find my channel too.
Excellent.
But resin infusion is a somewhat more complex method. I don't see it used very much in the model airplane world at all, because there's a lot of consumable materials that go along with it that get wasted. It's just an economy thing. At
Right.
our model airplane size, the time that it takes you to set up for an infusion, you could do a wet layup with less material. So,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of doesn't make sense. In my full scale build, I have used infusion in several places. I infused the outer skins for my fuselage, and I will infuse the outer skins of my wing. But at our model sizes, to me, it doesn't make much sense. There's not much advantage to it. It's for big stuff, really.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
a really neat process, but it's
It
just
just
not
seemed
practical at our sizes.
there's an awful lot of extra material that goes and
There
costs
is. You've got
that gets associated. Yeah.
the spiral wrap, you've got the resin brake, you've got the infusion mesh, you've got a peel ply, which I normally use peel ply anyway. Then you've got a bleeder material, and then you've also got a perforated ply to pull out the excess resins. The excess resin has to go somewhere. Once the bag
Okay.
pushes down on the layup, the excess resin comes out the top, and it has to go somewhere away from the surface. Otherwise, you're just pooling it on the surface, right? So there's a few different materials in there that allow that to happen.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, and I just remember, like, compared to wet layup, I guess, but the benefit is you're creating one of the most optimal matrices, weight wise and strength wise, and
You
that's the
are,
benefit.
but for me, that's not why I chose it. For me, I chose it on my fuselage because I'm one person in my garage. I can't possibly do a wet layup that big
I saw
in
a whole
enough
army of
time.
people come in and do a layup for you, help you out with one.
Well, that was for my molds, but when I actually made the
Okay.
part, it was just me and my son Ryan. He would help me a little bit, put the vacuum bag down or whatever. But
Okay.
that allowed me to put all the fiber in the mold over several days,
Okay.
and position all the materials, get the vacuum bag down. I actually pulled a vacuum down the day before to make sure that I had a completely tight seal, because Infusion is very picky about not having any leaks. With a regular vacuum bag system, you can tolerate a leak as long as it's not horrible, but it's not going to ruin the layup. With an Infusion, if you have a leak, that means where the leak is never gets any resin, so you're going to have a dry spot. So you could have a failed
That makes
part.
sense.
Yeah, that'd be bad. Real
So
bad.
it's definitely finicky.
Okay.
For me, again, it was a time thing. So where I'm able to make progress on this airplane is that, again, I'm not using advanced tooling or expensive processes or fixtures. I'm using my time. So I have the time with Infusion where I can lay my fiber in over a day or several days or whatever, and I'm not racing the epoxy. Get everything absolutely perfect. Pull a vacuum, check for leaks, everything's cool, and then I open the spigot. The whole infusion for the fuselage took about 40 minutes, and I clamp it off and leave it, go to bed, done. So
things.
For me, it makes sense in some cases, but it doesn't always make sense in most cases, at least at the production levels and the sizes that I'm doing. Mostly Infusion is like giant boats or big layups where you can't get enough people with brushes to get the thing wet out in a reasonable amount of time.
Okay.
Or hypercritical aerospace, you have very, very tight resin constraints, for instance. And Infusion makes sense for that, but
Yeah.
I'm not building an F-35,
What? I don't know. It kind of looks like it might be almost there. It looks really
Well,
good.
thank you, but I got you fooled.
Well, maybe, but your plane looks so beautiful. I keep looking. I'm like, man,
Thank you.
and I kudos to the VTail. I mean, I don't know how efficient that is, but boy, it sure does.
Well, I mean, I can assure you that every square inch of that airplane is the shape it is for a very specific reason, and it has a V-tail on it for a very specific reason. So, I believe it is the most efficient choice for my airplane in this particular configuration. And I'm happy to go into why if you want to talk about that, but it's not a coincidence. It's there for a reason.
So we can talk about that in a second. So what I think we're gonna do is to hopefully keep this under like 18 hours. For our poor listeners who are like, oh my god, this is amazing.
Yeah,
but
sorry, I
can't
can
do it."
ramble.
Plus,
No,
Joni,
dude,
no.
it's fantastic.
I think we're all loving it, honestly. Why don't we go to a handful of listener questions? We will,
Right?
we'll call it, kind of cancel the one Craig thing so that way Joe can kind of close this up and pass this along, and then he's going to start Craig up again, and then Brian, as long as you feel like staying on, Joe, Red and I, and you can chat. Joe's got to get to bed and get to work tomorrow, and I've got to do, and then we can, I'll manage my own stuff, and then we'll chat for a little bit longer and talk about some of these other questions and these things we talk about. And so we'll carry that in like a blooper section or an additional release. Um, but yeah, I do want to continue talking about some of this stuff because they're really exciting things. But we had one listener, again, our guy who, Leon, who he does a number of resin parts and pieces to his ultralights. So he's
Right.
used a number of different things and he's done a number of tests and he's really interested. I hate to say it, but I dropped the ball in asking our community a little bit further ahead, but he came up with a whole bunch of really excellent questions that I think we
Sure.
should go to.
I will do the best I can.
So let's
It'll
get
be
on
better
to,
than we can do, I'm sure.
yeah, right. Ours, like, I don't know, watch a video. Oh, Red's got a bunch of great videos.
I
You
say,
can watch 'em.
there's this guy called Red. Go watch his videos.
Right. Oh my God. Okay, so let's get into listeners' questions. So this is most of these, with the exception of a couple, are from our friend Leon, who is he runs the ultralight airplane workshop. So he
Sweet.
said,
I can't wait to
"What
check out his stuff.
it's really cool. I love what he does for the, hey, this is what it takes to get from beginning to end, right? I mean, and it kind of goes over all the
Great.
details. Does a really good job. So I hope you do. Um, let's see. We talked about fiberglass versus carbon fiber. Is there a big consideration that we really need to check out about between the two? That was Sasha Flyer and Style asked this question. He says, fiberglass versus carbon fiber. What should we consider when using either of those? And then, is there epoxy
Great
that goes
question.
with one versus the other? Right.
Now, it's well, two parts to that question. So,
Yeah, there's
fiberglass versus carbon fiber. I would suggest that you only use carbon fiber if you really need the extra strength or stiffness, and really mostly it's stiffness. You can
Okay.
get equivalent strength out of fiberglass. Now it's going to be a little bit thicker, but it's going to be a heck of a lot cheaper for one, and it's
Yeah.
probably going to be easier to work with as well because carbon fiber is very stiff and it can be less than compliant around complex shapes.
Okay.
So I would say that most people tend to overuse carbon fiber, especially if they're just starting out.
Yeah. That's
The
exciting.
traction is it's carbon. It's super strong. Yeah, it absolutely is. But we run into that same minimum gauge issue again, where that patch
Mhm.
of carbon fiber is probably 10 times stronger than it needs to be.
Right.
and you could get the same equivalent performance out of a even a sloppily laid up fiberglass
Okay.
equivalent for a lot less money. So
Okay.
for me, carbon is all about stiffness. So when you're designing
Yep.
and you're considering carbon, or you have a part that you're looking at, consider stiffness as really the driving factor, unless you're having some crazy strong thing
Okay.
where carbon makes sense. But for me, it made sense. So to get the
Yeah.
stiffness that I wanted in the lightest possible structure, I chose carbon. But in the model airplane world, even the highest end of model airplane manufacturers do not use all carbon for the entire structure, except for in a very few extreme cases. So any of the high-end turbine jets, you're going to see fiberglass, foam core, and carbon fiber where it matters. Spar, bulkheads, things like that. The skins are going to be largely just fiberglass.
Okay. I got a question
So
about
where you
core
will,
materials. What? Go ahead.
hold on, I'm going to
thought you
finish.
were
I gotta answer the resin question too.
Oh, right. My
So
mistake.
the answer is resin doesn't matter. It'll work for both.
Okay.
But viscosity does matter. So if depending on what style of layup you're doing, generally working with carbon fiber, you'll want a thinner resin. It tends to wet out a little bit better. Now, any resin will work. It just takes a little bit longer to wet out. And you may entrain more air in the layup by working it longer. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there, but most laminating resins, if they're for laminating, will be perfectly fine with fiberglass or carbon fiber or Kevlar or whatever you're using.
Okay. And is that the kind it'll be labeled as when you look them up, the material, that they're laminating resins?
Yes, it'll be specifically for laminating. So if you buy your resin from a composites place that does laminating supplies, they'll steer you in the right direction. If you're not sure, ask.
Okay. Yeah, don't hesitate to call. Because they have a finishing, which is a little bit thinner.
It is, and it's really all about the viscosity. So you'll only see a finishing resin in the model world from like Bob Smith or Acer or Zap Products or something like that, and it's strictly just for, again, finishing. And what happens is that resin is a little more rubbery, so you get a little bit different finish. It's not necessarily a high strength finish. Well, it is stronger. It's not as strong as a laminating.
Okay.
Well, we lost his audio.
Uh-oh.
A quick note before we move ahead. Joe ended up having to finish off and close the recording before Red had fixed his technical difficulties. Listen through the end of the closing music, and we're going to resume the conversation with Red, Brian and I. And we're also going to have, to fill in the video that we were not able to capture, I'm going to put in a slideshow of builds that Red has completed, as well as a couple good examples of some fiberglass construction. So bear with us. We're going to bring it out to a close here, where we finish up the listener questions and finish up our conversation with Red Jensen on composites. Stick with us.
Well, it's going to be a little bit of an awkward closing, as technical difficulties are making things a little weird. You won't be hearing from Red at this moment, as we've been having some difficulties, but just know that I will be speaking to him, and Red, hopefully you get to hear this later. Guys, as always, we thank you for tuning in and listening. We hope you have enjoyed listening to this conversation as much as we've enjoyed having it. I know Brian's been over here just geeking out, just as much as Matt. Both of y'all just been big old grins the whole time.
It seems like you've learned a lot along the way that you didn't expect to. You're like, oh wow, I had no idea it was like this.
It's once this episode's released, I'm gonna have to go back in and listen to it to myself.
Yeah.
Just to properly absorb everything. I mean, the good news is I'll have 2 weeks in Florida to do it.
Yeah. Good.
Sure.
Maybe I'll sit on the beach and listen to the waves and listen to the episode again. I don't know.
Nice. Sounds good.
But hopefully you guys have be able to absorb a lot of this information, and hopefully it'll be beneficial to you. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, complaints, send them to Matt. You can email us at aviationrcnoob@gmail.com. You can reach Matthew at aviationrcnoob.com, or you can reach me, Joe, at aviationrcnoob.com. Of course, we always have the Facebook group that you can swing by and join. I think
We
the group
always
helps
welcome you
us
to.
get alerts.
Yep, we always
better than-
welcome you to join the Discord group with the.
Yep.
Basically, an invite and a doobly-doo.
Thank you, Matthew Coville.
Mm-hmm.
One day he may realize that we're crediting him every time we do that.
It would not be wonderful.
He's a decent guy.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and we hadn't mentioned it, but we, as always, thank our patrons for continuing to help to keep the lights going, and making it so that Matthew and I can continue to do this thing that we enjoy doing and speak to you guys every other week on average without worry about it impacting things. You guys cover that, and we thank you for that. If you want to become a patron, go over to patreon.com/aviationrcnoob and sign up.
Yep. I
We'll,
want to thank Brian for joining us tonight, for being the resident expert, I guess, the one who could help us understand this and ask the geeky question. Like, yeah, I know. I really appreciate you joining us tonight. As always, I think Joe and I always love getting a chance to talk to Red and see what he's working on. And I'll tell you what, that plane looks so beautiful. And
it
I know
does.
he can't respond right. He's trying really hard to get back in, but and hopefully we'll be able to continue this conversation in a short minute. But I want to thank Red for joining us today. Hopefully we can input his response here. But yeah, thank you very much for being here and joining us. It's been an excellent conversation. I learned a million things that I need to go back and kind of replan a couple things, I think, with my project coming up, but I'm excited to get to it. And I'm blown away that he's like, no, call me. I don't care how long it takes. We're gonna sit down and get you fiberglass and stuff. It's gonna be great.
We've had Red,
He's amazing.
twice before now,
Yeah.
and he's back for a third time, and it just continues to blow my mind that Red's a great guy, and it would not cross his mind, but it just blows my mind that he'll come on and spend this time with us. So Red, we thank you, and it sounds like there's further conversations to be had. You are welcome to come back anytime you want. Matt, you can continue the conversation with these two gentlemen if you would like. I do have to get some sleep, so
yeah, please go do it. It's getting late on our end for everybody, for sure.
Yeah, last minute, anything on your front?
No,
Brian,
just appreciate you all
last
staying up.
Just good. This is just such fun, good stuff. I will definitely be listening to this episode again after the fact as well.
All right, and Red,
Very appreciative.
Thank you so much. And guys, we will catch y'all next time. Bye.
Let's see. Most effective yet easy cord. Hold on.
Foam was my answer for that.
I'm gonna. Okay. Yeah. So we were about to answer. So yeah, what was the most effective yet easy to use core material? You said foam, but there's a lot of different kinds of foam.
There is.
Is it like the Dow kind of light density foam, or are we talking like Dollar Tree foam board foam?
No, you want a stiff foam. So there are specific foams made for core, like Roacell, Divinacell, Lastifoam, Micell. There's a ton of different cores. Again, it depends on what you're trying to do. That typically is for like a bulkhead or a wing skin type of situation. Now, for just a bulkhead, regular old blue insulation foam would be just fine.
Right, because you're just looking to get distance between the one layer and the other. As
for a wing skin, if you're doing a hollow molded wing and you wanted a sandwich core wing, I would probably not use that because it's too soft, and you're really going to get some flex in there, and it's not really the most efficient way to do that. So if it's a wing and your choice is, Dollar Tree foam board or balsa, use balsa. Balsa's stiffer, and it's going to resist the loads better. But balsa do the same thing, but it's just an expensive core material, right? You can foam is cheaper if you can find it readily available.
I gotcha. So you basically create the normal wing and the skin out of balsa, and then you cover that.
Well,
with
you
hand
would do if you're doing a molded wing, you would do a sandwich core. In other words, you'd have face plies in your mold, then your core,
Oh,
and then your
okay.
inner plies, and then you vacuum that all down, and you get half of an airfoil, right? And then you join the upper and
Yeah.
lower halves of the airfoil with a few ribs and some spar structure to
Yeah.
create a wing. But
Okay.
if you're just coring, bulkheads or stiffeners or something like that, balsa, foam, whatever you got is fine. You just want distance between the
Okay.
plies to create that I-beam.
Mm-hmm.
And if you
Okay,
and if you
perfect.
can, join the faces plies if possible, wherever possible. So in other words, if you have an inner and outer layer where they come off the foam, have those two plies come together, and that'll help strengthen it even further.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. You had a question about suppliers and distributors. Which ones are good for small purchase of composite materials? That was one of the things I noticed when I was like, well, you could buy a lot,
Yeah.
and then we got a great price for you. You want to buy like a yard or 4? Because I mean, we got a small. It's like, yeah, that's not.
Yeah,
gonna
there's
be easy
not
to do,
so
especially with the other parts of that.
ones that cater to the RC world are like CST Sales, ECP Composites, Composite Envisions on some scale, Fiberglass, Rockwest Composites, Aircraft
Mhm.
Spruce, places like that. It really kind of depends on what, again, what you're buying. But if you want to buy like 1 to 5 yards of something, probably CST Sales.
I'm surprised that there's not like I'll call it Tower Hobby or somebody who hasn't put together like we'll call it the RC fiberglass kit, right?
Yep.
Where it's like it's smaller quantities, a little bit of everything. It's everything you need. It's all there.
Yeah.
But it's enough for a plane or two. And it's not like, oh yeah, here's a roll or here's
Yes.
a 4 gallons that costs
CST,
$180.
yeah,
Like,
CST
whoa.
does that. They have smaller quantities of things. And typically
Okay.
you won't
CST's the
find
one.
one clearinghouse that'll have everything you want. Like I might buy resin from one place and cloth from another place. And
Yep.
you just have to shop around a little bit, unfortunately.
Yeah. I've noticed that. It's interesting to know, like, you're like, no, it's been a trouble the whole time.
Yeah.
It seems like. Okay. I think we kind of talked about it a little bit. One of the questions, again, these last bunch are by Leon, designer 103
Great.
on our
Yeah.
forums. Again, he's played with it and he's tested a bunch of stuff because he wants to see, where is it useful and where is it not?
Yeah.
When weight is the key.
Yes.
Composite use has got to be judicious, right? Everything actually is a judicious use. He goes, okay, so is PrePreg worth using on small projects with small budgets?
No, because you need a freezer and you need an oven, and you typically can't buy it in the quantities that a model airplane guy would use. Even an ultralight guy, unless you're doing like major production. It's just not. It doesn't make sense. Your tooling also has to be high temp as well. Most of the prepregs are like a 300 plus degree cure, so you're not going to get that in your garage easily.
Is that 300 degree Fahrenheit or Celsius?
F. Yeah.
And then
So I would say prepreg is not very practical for the average guy. Now the poor man's prepreg kind of is, but not a regular prepreg. The other thing you got to remember too is prepregs have what they call an out life.
Yeah.
So if you get a roll of a prepreg, it can only be out of the freezer for so much time before it's not a certified material anymore. Now, you may not care that it's certified or not, but if you're building things that your posterior is going in, then maybe you'll consider that or maybe not. But I think overall, practically, prepreg is not applicable for what we're doing.
Okay. No, I mean that makes sense. Like the poor man's prepreg was very interesting to me. And I thought like, okay, cool. You can sit down and just lay it out, get it done and put it away. And then it's like, oh, it's actually relatively easy to kind of size and shape and get it ready so that when it's time to do the layup, you just go, oh, let me just burp. It seemed so much
are there
like the whole process wasn't this mess. It was just.
Are there certain types of resins that work better for the that poor man's prepreg than others?
I've only done it with West, MGS, and Resin Services HTR. So I can't tell you,
Okay.
but I don't think so. All of them slow down when they get frozen
Yeah.
or stop the cure cycle. So
Mm-hmm.
I would just say if you have something you want to try, just make a small batch and see what it does.
Cool.
Okay, good. That's a good question. What are the pros and cons of moldless with solid foam core wings versus wings with molded sandwich foam core skins? Basically saying either wet layup or vacuum bag.
Yeah, great question.
Using resin infusion. He goes, I know. I hope it makes sense. And
Yeah, absolutely does.
Yeah.
Well, I always say if you're going to build one of something, a wet layup, moldless construction is probably the way to go. The second you build two of anything, it's almost better to build a mold and do a sandwich core type construction, or even just a wet layup construction. So,
okay.
For me, even though I'm
kind of like what you did with yours, even though you're not anticipating building a second, but
yeah, the reason I did mine was for fidelity, the airfoil fidelity. It's the lightest structure I can build. Wet layup, moldless construction is going to be heavier than molded low core construction, no matter what. You just can't get the same structural efficiency out of a fully cored part, for instance, right?
That makes sense.
But a lot of times that makes way more sense to do that than it does to create a mold. So in my case, I was hyper interested in OML fidelity. So the OML's outer mold line. I designed this specific shape, and I want to hold that specific shape as closely as I possibly can. Yeah. So for me, molds made sense. I could have had the airplane done years ago if I would have built it, moldless construction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You would have had the CNC'd wing shape or the hot wire.
Yeah, well, it would have been but it would have been a lot more manual labor to get the surface fairness that I wanted. Most certainly heavier, and zero chance of building another one.
Right, that's a good point. No, it's and also just watching that process overall, because you look at it and you're like, how is that going to work? And you kind of develop it, and you're like, oh, okay. Now, what I noticed is while you're doing the mold, like the mold is pretty much, we'll call it, other than hold on, we'll keep going through these, but I got a couple questions about Gelcoat and release, and then what's the beading that you put in between the mold form edge. So we'll hold that until we get these things done. But there's that beading that you use the putty or whatever. We'll talk about why.
And I got a
I think I know what you're
question
asking,
too. So we'll come back to that.
Go ahead. So I mean, that's the answer for moldless versus molded construction. If you're building a one-off, do moldless. If you're looking for the lightest possible structure or the highest fidelity, make a mold. If you're going to build more than one, probably consider making a mold. Now, molds don't have to be that complex, right? You can make a simple mold that's a male mold, for instance, of a blister or a bump or a canopy or something like that. It doesn't have to be very complex. Mold doesn't mean going through all the effort that I did to make, shiny tools, right?
I mean, you could even consider something as simple as a sheet of glass as a mold for making flat plate.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. For sure.
Well, good. I didn't even think about that, but yeah. What are the trade-offs between a wax silicone mold release and a permanent mold release like Freecoat 700NC or a semi-permanent mold release?
I have and used both of them. I grew up using wax and PVA. I recently, I say the last 5 years, done a permanent release. Permanent releases, to me, really have their place in high production and high volume molding instances. I can get every bit as nice a finish with regular old wax and PVA than I can with Freecoat. Freecoat just saves you the time between cycles of popping the part out, cleaning the mold, prepping it for the next layup, and going. So it's really it's really an efficiency thing.
Okay. So we didn't really cover how you prep between.
And we never talked about
have a part. and then you're about to go put stuff on it, right? If you're not doing a wet layup, if you basically have something you're trying to create a mold from,
Yeah.
You need to be able to release the one from the other, and if they're both epoxies, they're literally you're gluing it to itself.
Yeah.
So you need to put something in between for it won't. So it won't.
Epoxies work really well at gluing epoxy to epoxy.
Right, exactly. That's the most amazing part about it. It's
Yeah,
like, I don't know,
yeah.
this epoxy, this epoxy. We'll just glue it with epoxy,
Yeah.
and off it goes. So PVA, what is PVA? So I've got glue, and it says it's PVA. I think, right?
Yeah, PVA.
The white glue.
PVA in the composite world is polyvinyl alcohol, and it's a water-based release liquid that turns into a film when it dries. So the water evaporates out of it, and alcohol evaporates out of it, and you're left with this skin film that's microns thick if it's applied correctly, and it's just an insurance layer. Now, I have molds that I'll never use PVA in. I'll just use wax. If you wax a mold properly and enough, you don't need PVA. PVA just ensures that it's going to release. If you have a mold that's been used, like you get 3 or 4 pulls out of it, it's become seasoned, and you can wax it and just wax it, no PVA. Sometimes I'll not PVA the thing in the first place for various reasons. When I was building molded racing airplanes, I like to paint them in the mold, and you do a multicolor scheme in the mold. So if you put tape in the mold and there's PVA, you'll pull the PVA out. So you can't do that. But with a waxed mold, you can tape it, paint your lines, paint your markings, your race number, whatever it is, pull it out, do the next color, whatever, and you can do a multicolor paint job in a mold with just wax. So you can absolutely mold without using PVA.
Cool.
So that effectively becomes the outer layer of the finished product, sitting right on top of the edge of epoxy, or is it literally one layer of epoxy deep when you're done?
The PVA you're talking about, or what?
No, I'm talking about when I'm really well. Okay, maybe we should leave PVA alone, and we can. But I'm talking about more doing a color scheme in the mold.
Yes, that becomes the outer layer of the part, and the epoxy effectively glues to the paint. So when you build an airplane,
right?
In fact, if you can see behind me here on the right there.
Yep.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
I think he bumped something that time.
Yeah, I think so. Hopefully he can get reconnected.
I had some PVA comments.
Yeah. God, I wish my nose. This bad day to stop taking methamphetamines. Sorry, I can't say that at work.
Glue.
Right. Oh, it's a bad day to stop sniffing.
Officially the worst.
That's okay. I'm assuming that when you picked up your laptop, all of a sudden it all went downhill from there.
So
we see the plane behind you.
What I was trying to show you is that's my wing mold right there. And
Okay.
the gray is primer in the mold. So before the part even exists, the paint goes in, or in this case, it's primer. And then when you do your layup, the epoxy bonds to that, and it becomes about as durable finish as you can get. Like you can't scratch it; you have to sand it off. It's not going to flake.
Awesome.
Well, let me caveat that: if you use the right paint, it will bond. Basically becomes monolithic.
Is that like a normal Krylon paint, or you got to use
spray paints typically don't work very well. You need to use a catalyzed paint. So I'm using an automotive, bottle refinishing primer.
Okay, well that's where you're bonding epoxy to epoxy.
Yeah. Or you could use a Gelcoat. A Gelcoat is a thickened resin with some tooling agents in it. Normally, I only use Gelcoat for the tool. I don't use it on the part, but you could put it in the part too. That's how hot tubs are made, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
So I was gonna say, why did you put, when you made the mold, why would you use Joe? Is it because the finish
comes out
just superior?
It's superior, and you can sand it and polish it and get a mirror finish.
Okay. Because if it's epoxy, it's a lot tougher.
Yeah. Well, if you just put resin down, for instance, there's a very good chance you'd have air bubbles. Or a sag or a run that's not covered somewhere. You can sand and polish the epoxy or the gel coat much easier. And it's a uniform color, and
All
it's
right.
easier to see, and there's a lot of reasons for it.
I mean, I've heard a lot of a couple people talk about making car parts, and that was like, hey, yeah, we're gonna make this fender, and they would use a colored gel coat,
Or you can.
and then
So,
write the fender,
so the gel,
and then basically when it came out the colored finished part,
yes,
right?
the gel coat is a good durable finish, but it's heavy. So for an airplane part, I'd rather
Okay.
have primer than gel coat in there. Much lighter.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
there are instances where you can buy models that have a gel coat finish, but it's not as common as it used to be anymore.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense why it'd be more common in automotive, right? As
Hot
opposed
tubs
to
is where you see gel. Hot tub and boats,
aviation.
like boats are almost
Right?
exclusively gel
Yeah.
coated and then painted or something like that.
That's kind of what I got, and that's what when I was looking at the composites, I'm like, everybody's using this gel coat. Why? Nobody really explains it. They just say, oh, it's gel coat, and we'll just throw some whatever in it. You're like, okay, I appreciate you've been here forever and obviously been doing it for years, but like for us yahoos who are just going, what in the world is all this?
Yeah. So the gel,
because there's a lot of parts and pieces to it.
for me, the gel coat is I use 2 layers of gel coat in my molds, and it's a thickened resin with some polymers in it that make it handle very nicely for repairs if you need to. Whereas straight epoxy would be a little bit more difficult to repair if I had a void in the mold or I cracked it or who knows what happens. Gel coat is just much easier to deal with.
Okay. He made a comment and he's like, my brain is stuck. He's working out his avionic sensors. So he's working on the designs of that part on his ultralight. And so he's like, I don't know. I'm not even thinking composites right now. But he came up with all these questions. He said, and this is the last one that I think it's roughly the last one. But Tony gave us one Flying Tiger after this. So we've got about 2 left. Are there applications where E-glass or S-glass would be better than carbon fiber? I think you kind of touched on it, but
yeah, in most cases, actually, it's better. Carbon is it's heavier than fiberglass, so unless you need strength from the carbon for some specific reason, you're almost always better off using fiberglass for a model application.
Is that because the carbon fiber takes up less volume than the glass typically in a given, we'll call it skin?
Yeah,
and therefore you're filling in with more resin, which is
can
heavier.
be, yeah. And again, most carbon is overkill for the job. You could get away with a lighter material.
Yeah.
So, just because it's carbon doesn't make it better. That's a fallacy that
I got
took me years and years and years to understand and finally admit to myself that it's okay not to use carbon. Right? It doesn't solve every problem.
It just looks better.
Yeah.
It does look better. Yeah, I'll give you that.
Depending on how pretty your layup is.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so the last question is from Tony, Flying Tiger. He says it, and you kind of answer this, but I just want to, get your answer to his question. Can you get away with not using PVA, just wax? He goes, if you're planning to use for the mold, or if you're only using to mold for a couple parts.
Absolutely.
And he says, I've got a wheel pant halves. I'm gonna make like 4 of them. I don't need to buy I don't want to buy a whole jar of PVA for just the 4 little
that's
parts.
a great example of where I would not use PVA. Now, what PVA does is if you do a poor waxing job, PVA covers everything. So it's insurance to make sure the thing is going to release. A wheel pant, if you miss a part waxing that, don't do composites. Like that's a small enough part that you should never miss getting the entire thing waxed, right? You do want to do multiple layers. I would recommend if it's a new mold, probably 6 to 10 layers of wax, and I would wait probably 20 to 30 minutes between layers. So put the wax on, wait a couple of minutes until it hazes, and then buff it off till you can't see it anymore.
So we're talking like turtle wax, like car wax.
You can use that. I would recommend a composite based wax, and that's because you can get some surface tension and contamination issues with some waxes, and depending on the resin type you're using, where you go to brush it in and it'll beat up on the surface and won't lay out properly. A can of wax is
that creates that.
$15.
That creates some nice pitting, I imagine.
Well, just and it'll stick, and then you ruined your part and your mold,
Yeah.
right? So spend the $15
Yeah.
on a can of wax. If you're a modeler, it'll probably last you your entire life. And
Right.
this is what I use right
Okay.
here. Happens to be sitting on my bench.
Okay.
And
Partially paste number 2.
Prandtl number
Right.
2, and then I use the Prandtl film, the component that goes with this PVA. But this will last most guys their entire life. And if you're gonna try composites, man, spend the $15 and just buy the right wax. It'll save you in headaches. The first part you ruin because you've glued the part in the mold, you will regret it if you don't. So yes, you can use McGuire. Some guys use turtle wax, all kinds of stuff, but just use the right wax and you'll be happy.
And the right wax is probably still the cheapest part of the whole thing.
Yeah. What's your time worth?
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, put it on, let it haze, buff it off, and you feel like you're pulling it all off, but you're not. Just do multiple coats, and then once you pull that first part out, you can probably get away with 2 to 3 coats on the next parts after that. And after you get several pulls, if you get into the dozen range, 1 coat of wax is going to be fine.
Okay.
So it cuts down on time.
That's awesome.
For multiples.
That really explains that, because I think I bought PVA, but I didn't pick up wax because I didn't know.
So if you're only going to buy one,
to grab,
buy the wax. Don't take PVA over the wax.
Chilly for me, but yeah, I hope if you're listening, listen. Don't do what I did. Buy ahead.
Yeah.
Listen to this episode, please. Cool. This I'm just trying to think of what other questions I might have had. Brian, do you have any questions?
I got one, and I got a sidebar. Your molds for your plane. I know you obviously only intend to build one aircraft out of them, but you put a lot of time and effort into those molds for other specific reasons. But how many, like if you were trying to pull a bunch of parts off of those, how many parts would be reasonable off of a set of molds like that?
So I say that I'm only going to ever build one, but that's probably not true.
Things change, right? You'll crack something.
Yeah. Well, my son, for one, he wants to build an airplane, and fine, if he wants that, I'll help him. But I'm really hoping to maybe sell a few wings to help recoup my costs.
Not a bad plan.
Right.
Well, I've built, to the best of my ability, production quality tools. So properly taken care of, they could pull hundreds of parts.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Would I build another Impulse exactly like this and sell it? Probably not. I would build wings. I might build fuselages, but I probably wouldn't build another V-tail. Maybe for my son, I guess. But that's just because it's my unique thing, and if somebody else wants to do it, they can put their own tail on it. But yeah, maybe. But that was always in the back of my mind. But I only know how to do molds this way and get good results. So if I shortcutted it, I would be rolling the dice a little bit, kind of like not waxing properly. I didn't know if I could make a decent part out of a lesser quality mold than I knew how to do. So it wasn't a lot of expense. It was mostly time. The way I built my molds. So that was my trade-off.
Well,
was there a lot of sanding?
Yeah.
Obviously, in building the original, right, to get the general shape and form, there's days and days and days of sanding. Look, watch the Arnold video. The first third of it is him sanding stuff.
Yeah, so I
putting in foam and then sanding it back.
Shortcutted that
putting
a
in
little
foam,
bit in that I started with a CNC'd shape, and then I paid my buddy to just wrap it in fiberglass, just some 9-ounce, put 2 layers on it just to make a hard surface, because it had to come 500 miles on a truck and get handled, and I don't want the foam to be chunked and whatever. So I said, just make it hard. I don't really care that much about the shape. I do, but do a nice job, but don't. It's not pretty, right?
Get it in the ballpark.
I need it close.
Yeah. So he did that for me, and then I started with Bondo and templates and lots of sanding, and finally got to the point where I had polished the whole thing to a 2000 grit finish, and then buffed it, and then pulled my molds from that. Now, that was way overkill. I didn't need to do that. Subsequently, I'm only going to about 600 now, because wax and PVA fills anything beyond 600 scratch. And again, for a one-off part, I can fix that finish after the fact, or I can sand and polish the mold in less time that it took me to sand the plug to get there. So I've learned trade-offs. And that's again from modeling, building wing tools and for RC jets and pylon racers and things like that. You want a 2000 grit finish because if you're painting in the mold, you're not going to do any finish work after the part's out. It comes out, it's done.
Mhm.
Whereas this is going to get a full sand and a paint job and a polish. So it didn't make sense to me. Well, it did at the time when I started, but
to get that detail.
as I moved on,
Yeah.
I realized that I need to go to that extreme.
Very cool.
Okay.
And then I was going to make a
That's-
comment about PVA. Most people are way more familiar with PVA than they realize, because the white glue sticks, hair products like hairsprays and gels and stuff are most of them are PVA based, and the most common.
The difference is viscosity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say they basically watered down with a, like you said, we'll call it an alcohol base because it
Evaporates.
flashes,
Yeah.
And
evaporates quicker. So that
and the
you don't have to
most
wait around
common
forever.
dissolvable supports for 3D printing are also PVA as well.
Yeah, that's right. So one thing that surprises a lot of people is that I spray my PVA. Typically, in the tech data sheet, they tell you to wipe it on or brush it on, and you want to kind of try to just smooth it all out, and it'll flow out a little bit. If you just dump it in a spray gun, even a high quality automotive spray gun, and you spray it, it'll spider web or cobweb, and or it'll be so rough that it ruins your surface, right? Well, a trick I learned a long time ago is that the reason, well, first you got to thin it with water. That makes it come out of the gun. But the real trick is you have to break the surface tension of the silicone, wax-based PVA, right? It's got this polyvinyl in it. That's the release part. It's a wax. Well, what happens is if you don't break that surface tension, it just beads up on the surface, and you end up being like a freshly waxed car coming out of a rainstorm.
Right.
You got beads everywhere. So the trick is you use a dishwashing surfactant like Jet Dry, Rinse Aid, Cascade, any of those things that has the sheeting action to keep water spots off of your glasses. A few drops of that in the PVA makes it flow, and it breaks that surface tension, and I get absolutely glass smooth PVA application by doing that, and that's 100%
with a gun.
With a gun to save time, because again, wiping or brushing PVA on a 14-foot wing mold is, I want to shoot myself.
Yeah,
takes
a lot of time.
But I can spray it in 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So that's one of the biggest time saver tricks that I know, and retaining a good finish with that.
Brian, you're supposed to remind me to write all these things down.
Hey, Matt,
oh wait,
write
we
all these
recorded
things
it.
down.
Good. Thanks a lot, buddy. Appreciate it.
Totally, yeah, totally different scale of thing. But I use like unperfumed or whatever hairspray for my 3D printer bed. Just give it a quick spritz, and it makes stuff stick better, and it makes it release no matter what.
So old school building trick. When you were back in the day, when you were fiberglassing an airplane for finish with really, really light cloth. I have some cloth that's just out of my reach over here. I could show you, but it's like half-ounce cloth, super lightweight.
Mm-hmm.
It's like tissue paper. It's super easy to get wrong, right? Hairspray, Aquanet over your balls.
That's what I use. Yeah.
And then you tack the glass down with it, and then you can wet it out.
That's brilliant. I've seen.
They do make.
Sorry, go ahead.
So a lot of people use 3M77 spray glue, and they'll use that. The problem with that is that doesn't dissolve in epoxy resin.
Mm-hmm.
However, they do make 3M71, which is specifically for composites. It even says right there, composite spray adhesive, right?
Which is probably
does dissolve.
It's probably just Aquanet.
Well, it's a lot like 77, but the difference is in my engineering calculations, I don't have to have a fudge factor for an unknown variable in the bonding structure. So this, I have a TDS for it, and I can tell that it's not going to affect my strength. So on a model airplane, 77, if that's what you got, great. Yeah. If my behind is going in it, I'd rather just use the right stuff.
Well, it's not just that your behind's going in it, but you are designing it to the edge, like we talked about,
Yeah.
to the, we'll call it the safety edge.
Well,
You're like, okay, any more than that,
And
I'm-
whether you
I'm
have
not
the data
comfortable
or
with it.
not for it makes a big difference in comfort level.
I mean, so 3M77 is
Yeah.
like $16 a can, and this is like $30 a can. So whatever, it's, you know, in the grand scheme of things, it's you know, worth it to me to have the right material.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, really cool. Dude, talk about holy crud, what a great like pile of tips for like, if okay, I don't know anything about this, but I would have made every single one of those mistakes. I would have been like, wow, I wonder if the spray gun works. And like, oh my gosh, it's spider webbing everywhere.
Yeah.
This is awful. Who said to do this? Because the person who said, oh, I put it through a spray gun or whatever, probably didn't put in the, oh, don't forget to add the rinse aid tip until you get like, 60, notes down and everybody's tried it and go, this doesn't work. And we're like, oh yeah, I forgot the rinse aid. And you
So the funny thing is like
4 days later you find it.
I learned that 20 years ago or something, right? And I never thought
Right.
anything about it. I just thought that's how you did it. And then I started telling people, oh yeah, I'm spraying my PVA, and they're like, well, how do you do that? I'm like, well, what do you mean, how do you do that? Everybody sprays it. No, nobody sprays it. So coming to find out that little nugget that somebody passed along to me was valuable to other people. So that was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Okay, I got a dumb question, right? If we're doing small parts, right? I just bought an air gun for painting in general. That's a whole journey that I'm excited to go down when I can pull it out and play with it. If I'm making molds and I'm doing that, and I could take some of the PVA and put it into the nozzle and do the spray that way, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what kind of gun.
No, for small
specifically.
stuff, I wouldn't bother, because then you've got to clean out the gun, right? And you got to clean it out with water.
Yeah.
And once you're done with the water, you got to spray all the water out of it, and you've got to fill it with a paint solvent. Otherwise, it's going to rust in some of the internals of the guns, especially if you've got a cheapo Harbor Freight gun. So, for a small thing, I would wipe.
I got a little bit better than that, but
yeah, but even so, like, I only spray big stuff.
Yeah.
I don't spray tiny.
Okay,
Yeah,
now
the
that makes
setup's
sense.
not going to save. The setup's
really
going to take so long. It's not going to save you time.
I
if
can
you're
grab
doing
a paper
something small.
towel, wipe it in there, in the time that it takes me to
and
walk
the
over there and
breakdown.
get my spray gun and start rinsing it out and getting ready to. It's just not worth it.
No, that's fair.
You can't leave
That's
the
fair.
PVA in there, because it'll cure over the outside of the nozzle, and it'll cobweb on you anyway. So it's not something you can just like have a
No,
dedicated PVA gun. It unfortunately doesn't work that way.
No. I know me. That's definitely not going to be me.
Can you?
I know how it works.
Is there a kind of a lead time, like how long you can put the PVI on ahead of doing your layup?
Indefinitely.
Yeah. I've always had issues with PVA being hygroscopic and acting strangely after it's absorbed a bunch of water from the air. But
well, I would cover it with plastic or something after it's flashed and cured.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've never left anything on there for weeks or months, but days certainly.
Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
And I think, more often than not, I find that if I have something that's PVA'd and I'm not getting to it right away, and I move the mold around, I end up tearing the PVA anyway. So I rip it all out and start over. So to me, it's a durability thing. I tend to do it just the day before or the day of, and then let it cure for an hour or two before I start a layup. Because it's really delicate. Okay. You can catch it with a fingernail, or if you're brushing your resin in and you get the end of the bristle wrong, it'll tear the PVA. So that's one reason a lot of guys don't use PVA on stuff that they want a really nice finish on, that they're painting in the mold.
Makes sense.
Because you can ruin it instantly with just one wrong move.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay, so one kind of sum up question is, if you're looking to do it, how long, like let's say you've got a 60 size flyer, right? Like 60-inch wingspan kind of rough size, right? Mm-hmm. What kind of ballpark time-wise should we be kind of planning out for how long it's going to take? Let's say I'm just saying, I guess it'd be creating mold, and then from the mold making a part, I guess, right? That's either that or just be like, I'm going to do what I'm doing with the Dragonfly, right? Which is I'm going to foam cut wings. I'm going to generally lay out the shape, and then I want to cover it in fiberglass, right? We're going to do wet layup.
Yeah. So there was two different questions.
It's something that's
a pretty loaded question.
It is.
Yeah. So
No. I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, what kind of ballpark are we looking at? Like, because I know, okay, I got a recipe for bread. It says 5 minute spread. You know how long it takes? It takes about 4 hours. It takes about 5 minutes of effort in the 4 hours. It's one of those things where you spend a minute or two here and then wait an
so
hour.
it's
And then a
just
couple minutes
like
there, and-
anything. First of all, composites has taught me patience over everything else. You've got to be patient with composites. Nothing happens quickly. Second of all,
Okay.
it's all about the prep. So having your cloth cut ahead of time, having a clean space to do it, having the proper materials to do whatever process with the composites you're going to be doing. If you just kind of walk out in the shop and start mixing resin and then thinking you're going to do something, you're not ready for it, you're going to just ruin your part, and probably put you off of
Right.
doing composites. So so you asked a couple things: making a mold and then whatever, making a part. My general rule of thumb is 10 times as much time to make the mold as it is to make the part. So if it takes you,
Okay.
100 hours to make a mold, 10 hours to make a part. That's a very, very rough guess,
Okay.
but it's probably pretty accurate. It may even be more than that. If you're just fiberglassing over a balsa or a foam structure or something and you're trying to get a nice finish, it takes a while. So you're going to do one side of the wing a day, then you're going to trim it, flip it over, do the other side of the wing. Then it's going to take some sanding and some filling and some more primer and whatever. So if you're trying to get a nice finish out of that, it's akin to painting a car. Pulling the trigger and putting the color on is the last 2% of the entire job. It's all the prep work that you spent before that getting it done. So I would not advise anybody to do something out of composites because it's quicker. Because it's most assuredly not.
No.
Especially if you're just starting out.
No, okay, I got you. Yeah, I mean, look, I could build that thing out of foam and just fly
totally
it and have fun, right? Like it will work just as fine. I could probably cover it with film and it'd be durable and just as, I'll call it slick.
But
but at the same time,
film is going to start sagging and it's going to break down eventually. And, whereas a durable paint finish is, it's a nicer finish, right? So it again just depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. No, I mean, that kind of gives me the, I mean, that's a ballpark idea. And that sounds like it's one of those things where you do a thing for an hour, you wait for.
Yeah.
And you do another thing for another hour, and then you wait for the hour to get to that special cure point. You do another like 10 minutes of fast work, and you go, okay, we're good for a while. I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah,
then you come back tomorrow.
By far,
do it again.
By far, the biggest time suck in composites is cure time. The time I actually touch doing something is a few hours, and then it's got a cure for 24 or 48 hours or sometimes longer depending on what it is. So again, it teaches you patience.
Do you tend to make a lot of the projects through NASA with composites?
Not a lot. We have that capability, but again, it just depends on what the
I know the
solution calls for.
One of the big projects you had was the droid, and that was just a standard balsa plane, and you were putting a lot of equipment in it.
Still fly that
plane
thing.
itself
It's
wasn't
20
anything
years
terribly
old. It's
special,
still just
right?
a balsa wood, big model airplane.
Right.
The thing about composites is, like, if you're going to do a molded airplane, you're stuck with whatever that shape is when that mold is done. So if you need to make a change and you need to build another airplane, you either build it like it was and then modify it, or you commit to a new set of molds. So for what we do for largely one-off things, molds don't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
For some things they do. Prandtl the wings they did. This new gas giant thing we're doing makes sense. A few other projects we've done, it makes sense. But I generally am a huge proponent of not reinventing the wheel. If there's an easier way to do it, I will generally do that just to get the research done more quickly. And if something works and that's a great idea and we want to go more production or whatever, do more of these, then maybe we'll consider a change.
Give me 12 copies of it. It's like,
that's a different story.
Okay, maybe we want to consider. Okay, yeah, good, man, amazing. I'm just gonna answer with just amazing. And I really appreciate it, Brian. You and I have both had like big smiles and go like, oh my gosh, this is great stuff.
Thank you. And Again, it's only because of air modeling that I've had the opportunity to learn all these different skills. You know, it's been a fantastic education. It's been a long one, but
Yeah.
I like where I ended up.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And even if I've only been it for so long, but I can't tell you just the things that I've learned that I never would have thought. Either thought I would have learned or cared to learn.
Yeah.
But I mean, everybody's like, "How do you know all that?" I'm like,
No, I just do. I've been
RC.
playing with
I don't
it.
know. I had to learn it for RC. Yeah, I messed around with it. It worked. Some of it worked. Some of it didn't.
It's funny, you know, the average
Okay.
RC guy has far more design experience than most of the folks in the aerospace industry, right? Because
Right. Yeah.
how
But
many
they're
different
working on
airplanes have
what,
you
3
built?
planes maybe in their life.
Well, yeah,
Right. 4.
I mean, a designer might be lucky to design 1 or 2 airplanes in their entire life.
Right.
How many models have you built? How many different planes have you flown? You know, just not exactly the same, but it's certainly credible experience.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think I've tested 3 or 4 or 5 different versions of the Prandtl in various terms and fashion. I haven't even built the one that Brian has yet. I'm excited. You know, it's one of those things where you're just like, okay, cool. But I love the fact that I've been able to try it. And mostly why I haven't done more is because I keep running into projects like these. They're just
How many
like,
cool
oh,
things
right.
to build.
That's the problem.
Yeah, too many ideas to
That's
try
the
out.
problem.
You know, oh, what
Too
about
many
that?
things, not enough time.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. I'm still rolling around all the like, oh, I want to do this with that project. Oh, I'm going to have to learn. Yeah, I got to learn INAV. Maybe we can learn how to do formation flying on a couple of these, or wouldn't it be? Because you know that's a possibility. Like, wouldn't that be freaking cool? Um, a bunch of other different things. Like, well, maybe that's too much at one. I'm like, okay, that's okay. We can do it in incremental steps. Get it to this, and then get it to that, and then move it up to the next step, and then in the meantime, I can test these out individually, and then I can see if they fly in a group. And it's like, okay, now can we get that to fly with the main carrier? Okay, it would be cool to link those in. It's like, okay, you know, FPV dreams.
You're
Okay,
heading
well,
down
I need
the
a ground station.
cooperative trajectory path.
Yeah, yeah, because I know me. I don't always get to go down that. There's been people I've talked to that amaze me in their ability to start a project and stick with it, and only work on that project until it's
I'm
done.
not that guy.
Not that good at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's for me it's
Yeah, I just
entertainment. So like I have a friend that he's into RC too, and he's like, I don't know how you can have so many unfinished projects. And I'm like, I don't know how you can limit yourself to one thing.
right.
So for
Yeah.
me it's,
I
you know,
how do you
even if I build something, I've had planes that I've never finished, right? And I don't feel like it's a loss. For me, it was one, it was entertainment, and I probably learned something. So, you know, even projects that I decide to pass along to somebody else, I don't regret any of that. It's not like I
yeah,
don't have
you
to have the
learn
thing. It's for me, it's the journey, not the
Yeah.
end.
right, you're part of that project was to learn a certain thing, and by the time you got to that, you didn't finish it, but you learned that part. That's what it was
Or
for.
I was entertained, you know. I didn't sit in front of the TV for
Yeah.
10 hours or whatever.
Yeah. I work on whatever
Yeah.
interests me at the time.
Yes.
And that's
Absolutely.
if
100%.
it's for entertainment, absolutely. Now, work's a different story, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
people are paying you to do the thing, but
But
that's a
yeah,
different
if it's
thing.
not
Yeah,
if it's not
it's
fun,
good.
or if it's not getting me somewhere fun
Yeah.
or interesting, I'll
Right.
work on something else.
Right.
All right. I'm gonna go in and dump Craig out of here. I've really seriously from Brian and I, Brian can obviously speak for himself, but from Joe and I, we really appreciate you joining us today.
Well,
I'm gonna see if I can we'll let snippet in. I really appreciate you joining us today and speaking and laying all the expertise from years of success and failure, doing the right thing and the wrong
well,
thing.
I hope it's helpful. I hope it might even be inspiring for some folks to give something a try that they might not have otherwise given a try, you know, and we've only just, I mean, barely scratched the surface, and my email's out there, my YouTube is out there. If you want to ask questions, feel
Mhm.
free to get a hold of me, and I'll do the best that I can to get you steered in the right direction. Because at the end of the day, it's all about
Yeah.
having fun. So if I can share a little bit of that, I'm more than happy to.
Good. We will put a link to your YouTube station so they can look at all the work that you've done on the Impulse. Get to know you, get to know that project, get to see the process, the way you do it, which is, I feel, top quality and just very thorough. And I really
Well, it might
appreciate
not be the
you
most
putting that
efficient
out.
way to get there, but I'm happy with the results. And if I had that sack of hundreds that you were going to send me, I might do it a different way. But that's the way I do it, and it
It,
works for me.
it, it might come in the shape of a cup or
Big,
a
big
t-shirt.
start.
I keep waiting
That's
for
about the best 100 I can give
the
you.
lotto or some big benevolent sponsor that wants to,
Um,
share
I
my
know, right?
vision.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, I don't have any illusions of that.
Yeah.
It's just a dream.
I'm surprised at how light the carbon fiber fabric is that you're using. I would have expected, I don't know what, the thicker 12K
Oh, you'd be
toe or whatever. And
surprised.
then I'm like, oh, now I get it.
You'd be really surprised at how light of a structure you can build with that. So we didn't really show or talk about it, but maybe I can. So that's the fuselage for my airplane right there, right? So that's
Mhm.
tails, canopy, the whole thing. There's no bulkheads
Mhm.
in it yet, but that is 68 pounds
Mm,
for that
mhm.
entire.
That's so cool.
This whole airplane,
That's freaking awesome.
Yeah, that's
one finger, right?
Oh, yeah, wow.
So
Right, probably one of your besides the motor and the gas, your heaviest item might be
me.
your landing gear. I mean, okay, I'm not gonna count you. I mean, come on.
So
That's a. I'm talking about for the airplane weight
I've budgeted.
distribution, right? You got
Yeah.
engine and fuel. I imagine the wheels are probably above the fuel.
Well, the minimum fuel is 5 gallons, but it's not included in the empty weight. So the empty weight minimum is 500 pounds. I've budgeted
Right.
225 for firewall forward. So that's the whole motor mount, engine, propeller,
Yep.
spinner, exhaust,
Yep.
everything to make it run, and then 275 pounds for the airframe. My fuselage right now is about 70 pounds. The wing, I'm shooting for it to be without landing gear 115 ish.
Okay.
And the rest of the weight's going to go in, wing attach and landing gear and avionics and controls and all that stuff. So according to my fantasy spreadsheet, I'm on track to make that. I have a little bit of margin for fudge, but that's pretty tightly controlled. It's the reason I'm building it the way I'm building it, because I really want to make a minimum weight. That's super important in any kind of racing, but especially air racing. And so that's really the driver of why I'm doing these methods to do this. I could certainly do it easier and quicker.
How the avionics, are they minimum traditional stuff where you're getting
It's
just some of the old school, or are you just doing like the LCD screen?
This experimental airplane, so there's no requirements. But I will have a single MFD panel, 11-inch, color touchscreen panel, and a radio, and that's it.
Yeah.
So day VFR only,
Okay.
no lights, no, no ancillaries, single radio,
Right.
no luxuries whatsoever, no heating, no.
Yeah. Well, you don't need it.
No.
I mean, you're in it for
It's a thoroughbred, half hour at a time at most.
like 20 minutes, half hour, and that's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
The engine's it's a spec engine for the class, right?
It is, yeah.
Does that include engine controls, or are you free to do whatever you want for engine control standpoint?
So it has to be carbureted, but it can be electronic ignition.
Uh-huh.
Most guys run magnetos because ultimately, at least right now, magnetos ultimately make more power than electronic ignition. Yeah, believe it. It's different than the automotive world by a long ways.
It must be something to do with the configuration of the engine itself, then.
Yeah, well, everything's pretty tightly controlled as far as what you can do. So there's not a lot to be gained by the complexity of an electronic ignition, because you can't have a adjustable timing curve, because you can't have a reference.
That's
so
part of
it's just
part of the class rules, right? Not part of the
that's
part of
right.
the experimentals.
That's right. Yeah, if it was free, I can with these engines, you're probably making at most 140, 150 horsepower. If I had free reign for cam profiles and porting and compression and swept volume and things like that, I could make probably 225 or so, maybe
what's
more.
the displacement?
200 cubic inches.
200. Yeah, we could easily make more than that.
And it's relatively low RPM. It's only about 4,000 RPM.
Yeah.
So, it's just an air pump. It's how many cycles can you get through it?
Yeah.
All right, well, that's it. This is Matt Allen signing off for the Aviation RC Noob podcast. Once again, we thank Red and Brian for joining us this week. And I know that they both expressed after the fact that they had a good time sitting down and talking about this subject. If you want to know more about composites, don't forget to go to Red's YouTube page, which will have a link. We'll have a link to a number of other resources. And then just keep tuning into this podcast, because that's some of the next adventures I'm going to go down. So you'll get to hear my firsthand experiences. So we hope to see you there. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.